To our second day of Corporations Committee, and this is our last scheduled meeting of the interim, and we will hold true to that. Couple of housekeeping things. Representative Chairman Olson is away, unfortunately, for some sad family matter. He's at a funeral in Evanston, and so he will not be with us today. He'll be excused. Senator Landon is probably in an Irish pub right now, and so we'll excuse him regrettably. And everybody else is here, I believe, in person or online. So we'll just get started. There's one hanging thing from yesterday when we did the election bills. In previous discussions about election bills, we talked about doing a combined bill or combining bills that can be combined, so that we just have one election rewrite. Let's think about that and maybe discuss that at the very end of the day. That's all right. Josh, any thoughts on that before we go?
Mr. Chairman, I'll send the committee members a list of the bills that passed both out of Douglas and yesterday, so you can look and see which ones might make sense to combine.
Yeah, it doesn't mean we have to combine them all. There might be ones you just want to set aside, be more controversial or whatever, so that's fine. So with that, let's get started. The next thing on our agenda is a update on rewriting the Telecom Act. Recall that this is a 2-year project. We don't really have any progress on that. We're joined today by the General Counsel of the Wyoming Public Service Commission, John Burbridge. You will not see very many commission people here today. They are very busy. About everybody's over in the hearing room. And so we appreciate Mr. Burbridge coming over to start us off with the update.
Thank you, Chairman Case. My name is Chairman Case. That is John Burbridge. I'm Chief Counsel for the Wyoming Public Service Commission. And the commissioners today do extend their apologies for not being able to attend. They are, as mentioned, knee deep in, or more like shoulder deep in, taking testimony and evidence in the Rocky Mountain Power rate case. I'm not going to talk about that today at all, but I will let you know that they are anticipating by the end of this hearing hearing from 29 witnesses, and they have over 300 exhibits. So it is a monumental task. So
it certainly is. And by the way, this meeting was scheduled around a previous version of the rate case scheduling. So we weren't supposed to overlap, but we ended up overlapping as different things were scheduled.
Thank you, Chairman Case. And as everybody knows, when you have as many interveners or as involved in that case, scheduling is somewhat of a trick. And they are, the hearing will scheduled to conclude next Friday. So they've got another full week of testimony ahead of them. I think they'll probably use all that time. Hopefully they won't need more. I don't have a whole lot to say about telecom today. As you might understand, we've been a little sidetracked and diverted by several electric utility issues and proposed legislation that has been front of mind, frankly. But what I am prepared to do is I was just going to give a quick update as to where the WSF fund is, because I suspect that any further interim considerations have to do with that topic with regard to carrying a similar program over to broadband. And that's just a speculation. Currently, the WS fund.
Would you explain the acronym?
Oh, WSF. I probably can't answer off the top of my head the easy question.
I think it's Wyoming Universal Service Fund.
Thank you.
There you go.
Gone.
No problem.
The fund currently supports 10 local exchange companies and approximately 22,000 essential access telephone lines. It disperses approximately $168,000 per month to support those lines, which equates to approximately $2 million annually. The 130% benchmark rate was calculated this year at $32.89, which is within 10% of the $30 imputed benchmark rate. The current fund balance is $1,037,000. So the fund is being put to good use. It is supporting a large number of customers. I can tell you that the companies that are taking advantage of the fund, it's All West Communications, CenturyTel, Chugwater, Silver Star, Union Telephone Company, United Telephone of the West, again, CenturyLink. And then we have Range Telephone, RT Communications, Tri-County Telephone Association, Du Bois Telephone Exchange. And so those are the local exchange companies that are currently participating in the fund. The other topic, and I know this is of interest to Senator Scott, I hope he's able to
He's online.
join us. I ran or had run the number of complaints we have received in 2023 to date. The Public Service Commission has received a total of 108 complaints. Of those, 122 were regarding CenturyLink, 4 were Dominion Gas Company, 1 was regarding Range and Telephone Company, and another one was Silver Star. And I would point out that virtually all of the complaints, the 102 of CenturyLink, have dealt with service issues. And that's really all I have to report at this point in time, and I would stand for questions.
Thank you, sir. Any questions for Mr. Burbridge? Any questions? Senator Scott, I see your hand up. Go ahead. He's got to get unmuted. There he goes.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I don't know what others have had, but my experience has been, and I don't know whether the PSC's heard anything about it, in addition to having periodic short outages here recently, I've had trouble on several occasions trying to call the LSO and found the whole LSO telephone system was down. I don't know if that produced a call to the PSC. I don't know if the whole system was down, at least you couldn't call into it. I got through by using a private cell phone number somebody I've got. Have others had that experience, or something unique going on? And this stretches back over really several times all summer.
Mr. Burbridge.
Chairman Case, Senator Scott, thank you for the question. Most of the complaints are quality of service issues and a timely repair of lines that have gone down for a variety of reasons. I would state to CenturyLink's credit that they have been responsive to our processing of these complaints and our requests to get expedited movement out of them, particularly if there's health issues at risk. So they have been pretty cooperative with us to get that done. And that's an important point, simply because when the commission several years ago determined that there was competition in CenturyLink's area, we no longer have regulation over them or jurisdiction over what CenturyLink is doing, which would include the service quality issues. And so they have been working with us on that. But that's the majority of the complaints are dealing with quality of service.
Okay, thank you. Senator Scott, I'm not sure we actually even know anything about the telephone system at the Capitol, what company provides that system, or whether the problems that you encountered were with that system or with the vendor or with our own components inside. So I'm not sure we can do anything about that. Maybe you could ask the LSO, or I'd be happy to ask the LSO more about it. But we don't even know what company that is or if it's a company. So anything else, Senator Scott?
Mr. Chairman, I would just say, I think we're going to need to give, when we do the telecom update, which I understand is next interim, I think we're going to need to give the Public Service Commission some mild form of authority to do things uh, to ensure that we do get adequate responsiveness. I found a good part of my difficulty has been getting through to the repair service at all. They have a phone tree that can take you 20 minutes to get through.
And Mr. Senator Scott, this is from your house?
Yeah, and I get intermittent
Do you
service.
mind, Senator Scott, if you don't mind, would you remind the public where your house is located?
We're southwest of Casper, 4 miles down the road. is Bow. And we have had periodic difficulties.
And Senator Scott, it's kind of, your internet is not the best today either. You kind of cut in and out, but we got the gist of it. So
Yeah.
you're demonstrating by example, Senator.
I don't mean I had a lot of trouble getting into the internet. That has nothing to do with the telecom company.
Okay. Anybody else from the committee? Representative Yen.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Given the high occurrence of specifically CenturyLink, I think when we do the telecom update, especially since we are publicly funding rural telecom with the Wyoming Universal Service Fund, we should make sure that they're held accountable to high service standards. So I'd like to bring them in next interim as well, if we can.
Representative Yen, I didn't quite hear understand what you said. You'd like to bring CenturyLink in to discuss?
Yes, when we do the telecom update next interim.
Yes, and I think we can definitely do that. I don't believe they're a recipient of the universal service funding. I may be wrong, but I don't think so. Mr. Burbridge, can you answer that question?
Yes, Senator Case, they are not a recipient of WSF funds. As a matter of fact, I think they were trying to propose legislation last year that would take away jurisdiction, that anybody that did not accept WSF funds would be non-jurisdictional to the Public Service Commission. So they've sort of broached that subject as far as how that would affect their jurisdiction within, with the Public Service Commission.
And so anyway, we'll be addressing this in the future for sure. Anything else for Mr. Burbridge? Anything else? Thank you very much, Mr. Burbridge. Stay close if you can today, and our compliments to the commission.
Chairman Case, I will not be straying far.
Okay.
Thank you.
Would anybody else like to address us with a telecom update of any form? It's a 2-year project by the committee. It's not necessary. I'm not really encouraging you, but I'm asking. Mr. Hendrickson? No, okay. Anybody else? Anything online? All right, with that, we'll move on to our next topic today, which is electric utilities. And this one is probably not going to go as quickly as the telecom just did, would be my guess. But and we had a special meeting here in Cheyenne and came up with some bills regarding electric utilities. So I suppose we get started by just going through the bills, unless the commission wants to offer any preliminary remarks. I don't see any. So let's just start with the first bill, which is 24 LSO 228, Public Service Commission Electric Reliability.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Morning, Mr. Anderson.
Josh Anderson, LSO. So as you noted, we met last month in this room on this topic. We had a number of bills before the committee at that meeting, and this was one of them that we talked about at the last meeting. It was amended slightly and then forwarded to this meeting. This one's dealing with electricity reliability. Again, these bills were all requested at the end of our meeting up in Douglas, and then discussed here in Cheyenne in September. So this bill amends an existing requirement for the commission to establish standards for electricity reliability. The changes at the last meeting, you'll see on page 2, were to add the not later than December 15th, 2024 to put a deadline on this. And then also added the phrase on line 16 related to adequate dispatchable power in Wyoming. The final amendment out of the last meeting was on page 3. There was previously a reference to a civil penalty that was deleted out of this bill. Otherwise, the bill is the same as it was at the last meeting, and take any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, questions for Mr. Anderson? Any questions from the committee? Anybody online? Senator Scott's got his hand up. Senator Scott. Unmute.
Mr. Chairman, question on the title of the bill as it stands right now. If would it enable? I don't see anything about the dispatchable power in that title of the bill. Is that there? Because I think we need to tie this in with making sure that it's adequate dispatchable power.
Okay, Senator Scott, I think we got that. You break up a little bit, but the essence is in the real title, not the catch title. It has an act relating to public utilities requiring the Public Service Commission to establish standards related to electric reliability. And I think you're suggesting we should add something like "and dispatchable power" in that context.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I think so. I'm going to propose a more detailed amendment when we get the time, but I think it at least needs to have that in the time.
Okay, thank you, Senator Scott. We'll note that and come back to it. Anything else? Anything else from the committee? Let's get some public comment. Mr. Burbridge, any comment?
Thank you, Chairman Case. Just the only comment that the Public Service Commission really has on this bill, and we're okay with this bill, but we don't feel that the penalty provision that's been cited, 3712-201, is a sufficient enough incentive to ensure that any utility is going to provide reliable power. It only provides for about a $500 fine and a misdemeanor. That's really not going to get their attention. And I looked this morning and I noticed that at least for pipelines under 37.2.128, it does give the Public Service Commission more authority to do administrative or civil penalties up to, I think, and I didn't have a whole lot of time to spend on this, so I may have to get back together with LSO on this issue, but up to like $1 million a day if they've got sufficient issues that warrant penalties. And so we're just a little concerned that a misdemeanor is not going to get the attention of the utilities that are in a position to actually, well, all of them, to provide a reliable power. And just off the top of my head with regard to Senator Scott's adding the dispatchable power, I need to think about that one a little bit more, but I think that maybe opens up a whole lot more stuff as to, what's dispatchable, wind, solar, it's all dispatchable. The question is it readily dispatchable? So there is a difference there that I don't know if Senator Scott is thinking about that I didn't hear today, but that just popped into my head when I was listening to what he was talking about. And I would stand for questions.
Questions for Mr. Burbridge? Any questions? Mr. Burbridge, perhaps what we could do is have staff take a look at 37.2.128, kind of look at that, and we can all look it up and think about maybe bringing that into this section. Maybe we could just refer to it, but I doubt it, but that would be the possibility. Secondly, with respect to the dispatchable power, I think I'll hold my question because Senator Scott's got his hand back up, and then we'll go to Senator Boner. Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, just responding to Mr. Burbridge, what I'm trying to talk about, and forgive me if I don't get the terminology exactly right, is to make sure there's enough power that we can turn on generation to meet power needs when there's a shortage, and not depend on sources that are intermittent. I think that's a key to the reliability thing, and I think that has to be part of what we're dealing with here. And I think part of what we're dealing with long-term as we approve facilities.
Thank
And
you. Thank you, Senator Scott. I think we get it. Let's go to Senator Boner.
Yeah, so thank you, Mr. Chairman. On that last point, just looking at the definition section of 3718-101, we have both dispatchable and reliable. Reliable, I think, is, I'll just read it, says means generating electricity that is not subject to intermittent availability. So that could be a easy fix to throw in reliable and crown dispatchable when the time comes, Mr. Chairman, to address that concern. Just make sure we're abundantly clear.
Perfect. Thank you, Senator Boner. Anybody else? Representative Haroldson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, excuse me, just reading 37-128. Obviously, the beginning of it would probably not apply in the fact that it is the Federal Pipeline Safety and Regulatory Certainty of Job Creation Act. But below that, it does have a provision for the jurisdictional activity within the state of Wyoming may be subject to civil penalty not to exceed $100,000 per day per violation. For each day that the violation persists. However, the maximum civil penalty shall not exceed 1 million for any related series of violations. So I think we have the nomenclature that could work. And if we did, though, it would be 100,000 a day. But if there were multiple infractions, which I'm not sure exactly how a multiple infraction would work in this case, but it could be up to 1 million.
Thank you, Representative. Thank you very much. Yeah, it doesn't sound like we could just refer to that section. We probably have to bring in something similar would be the gist of where we should go. Anything else from Mr. Burbridge? Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the section of statute this is going into talks about rulemaking process established by rule, energy portfolio standards, and this is one of a new component that would be under, or an additional component would be under. So where do we have rules that have been established based on the current 3718-102? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Burbridge, if you can.
Chairman Case, Senator Barlow, thank you. We have some rules that address reliability, but probably would have to be amended to more specifically address the penalty provisions that would be put into place with this. So the rules that we have now are not, focused on this aspect of trying to enforce reliability, but it is, of course, part of the overall charge of the Public Service Commission to assure that there's safe, adequate, and reliable power at just and reasonable rates. So there's an underlying current of, that the commission has jurisdiction over that.
Then to Senator Barlow and Mr. Burbridge, your existing rulemaking permission would extend to your general obligations. We wouldn't need to put specific rulemaking in this, I wouldn't imagine.
Chairman Case, I thank you for the question. I don't believe that we need a specific line saying that we shall promulgate rules. Our broad authority under the act itself would give us the ability and the authority to do that very task.
Excellent. Anybody else for Mr. Burbridge? I think you're off the hook for a while. Oh, sorry, Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just to be clear, on page 2 of the bill, line 7, existing language shall establish by rule. What we're adding is something that's underneath that Romanet A, sub. And that's my query, is where do we have with what's already been authorized and actually, I guess, not authorized, but requested to establish by rule all of the other things that are already under that section. And is this, anyway, that's what I want to know. Where are we with already what's been requested? Thank you.
Mr. Burbridge?
Chairman Case, Senator Barlow, I don't think it hurts anything to have it in there one way or the other. You could leave it in. We'd still engage in the rulemaking. The real hammer here would be the establishment of the ability of the commission to look at civil penalties for violations or reliability issues, which would have to be established by statute. We could not just do that by rulemaking.
Perfect. Thank you. Anybody else? Thank you. Is there any public comment on this proposed legislation? Any public comment? Mr. Acey? If you're going to offer public comment, you might want to scoot up towards the front so we go efficiently, but welcome, Mr. Acey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committees. My name is Bruce Acey. I appear here today on behalf of Montana Dakota Utilities Company. Montana Dakota provides electric and gas services in the north central part of the state. It's also a part of a system that provides services in the western part of the United States. With respect to the proposed bill, we do not oppose it. I would simply remind the committee that the commission has broad authority with respect to rulemaking, and I would suggest to the commission that they have authority to do much of this, but to the extent the committee believes that there's a little guidance that should be provided to the commission to direct them with respect to where they might expand their resources in promulgating regulations, then this provides that guidance to them. I do believe that they have the authority presently that they can engage in really any rulemaking that they need to address the safety and reliability of electric service to consumers in the state of Wyoming. But to the extent it provides guidance to the commission so they know the direction that the legislature would like them to take, then I think it's appropriate guidance that the legislature can provide. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Acey. Questions for Mr. Acey? Any questions? Not seen any online? Thank you, Mr. Acey.
Thank you.
Looks like we have a local utility going to jump up here. You don't provide telephone service to the Capitol, do you? Just checking. Mr. Bush, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, not anymore. We don't. No, we don't. David Bush with Black Hills Energy. Just quick thoughts. I think we're kind of in the same spot with this bill. Realizing the conversation from the committee is mostly focused on the generation side. Whenever we talk about reliability, that concerns us a little bit if we're talking about distribution, because there's a lot that's not under our control when it comes to some of those outages, and therefore getting fined for some of those things. So that was our primary concern. As long as these, the proposed legislation focuses on rules around making sure we have adequate generation, we do that already. The commission does that already. That's something that happens all the time. Again, our concern was, that's what happened at the Capitol last year when we lost power based on an animal outage for the most part, or someone hitting a power pole, or any of those kind of distribution level items that we don't have control over. We didn't want to face fines for that. So if it is the intent of the committee to just focus on ensuring adequate generation, we're there and all is well. So.
Okay, questions for Mr. Bush? Haroldson, Representative Haroldson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bush, thank you for coming and speaking to us again. Excuse me. Yeah, distribution, obviously, there's a lot of things out of control on that you guys can't take care of, and we understand that. But let's talk back to, I believe it would have been, and you might have to correct me on it, was it 2021 whenever Texas had kind of their
Storm
black
Uri.
swan event,
Uri.
if you want to call it in the electrical realm. Obviously, that was an act of nature, an act of God outside of their control. But I think we can all agree that maybe what happened after the fact, as far as with what they had in their portfolio and what they had for generation, fell very short because of a lack of planning on their part. So can you speak? This is what I'm looking at. When I look at that situation, I think that's what this more addresses, where a utility chose not to have foresight into the potential. Now, a raccoon in a transformer how do you have foresight into that, right? The high school kid that was going too fast into an icy intersection, how do you have foresight into that? An act of nature that we know happen. Talk about that. Let's talk about that generational aspect.
Mr. Chairman, and
Mr. Bush.
I'm not, I've read some about what happened in Texas. Primarily that was a extreme weather event that they weren't prepared for. Frozen wind turbines, frozen gas generation, frozen coal generation. They had a lot of issues, lines down, of course, too, from the weather. So, I mean, for us, that's something we looked at after that situation, and can say pretty confidently that being in Wyoming, our engineers have prepared our system to the best of their abilities, of course, to prevent that sort of a situation. That is something that I think black swan moment, or a teachable moment, or whatever we want to call it. I think a lot of the utilities have taken a look at that and said, what do we need to do? Now, I remember reading that ERCOT, the administrator down there of their grid, had recommended that they harden their system more, and that had not been done. There was certain things that were supposed to be engineering terms that I don't know. They were supposed to harden their system against more extreme weather events, and the generators down there didn't do that. So that led to part of this problem. So, I think to your point, there is a lot that's gone on since that moment for utilities. We have also taken an examination of our generation and looked at it. And again, the transmission side, some of that stuff is federally mandated that we deal with, right? The transmission side is all FERC and NERC, and we're constantly looking at that stuff. So, but we're also, when it comes to having adequate generation, that is what the IRP process is, working with the commission, working with the power providers that we have, and ensuring that whether it's coal, gas, renewables, market purchases, whatever, we have enough power to serve Cheyenne, which is our primary service area for electricity in Wyoming. We peaked at about 300 megawatts this summer. Our daily average is 240, 250 megawatts. So we're growing rapidly, which has led to an examination for us on what do we need to ensure that we have the power to continue serving Cheyenne adequately. So, and again, working with the commission on that, that's something they do.
Any other questions for Mr. Bush? Certainly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bush, thank you. Yeah, and I definitely don't disagree. And as we continue to see our demand grow, there's going to have to be the balancing act. We understand that. One of the things that I think too is, as I read this and I saw this, and my brain went to the scenario of a freeze up of renewable issue, because that is an issue you always have. If you have an ice storm, wind and solar doesn't work. So do we have the base load generation to guarantee our reliability? And I think that's, as you talk about distribution and generation, that's our concern.
Mm-hmm.
We don't ever want to get upside down where we have something that isn't an out of the ordinary event in Wyoming like Texas had. How are we going to stand in that place and go, we will provide reliable, cost-effective power to a generation window that is going to make sure that our people stay warm in the winter or cool in the summer type concept. So thank you. And is that something, I got to make it a question. Is that something that you guys have thought about as far as if you were to lose all of your renewables in a single moment? And do you have the generational stability to handle that through baseload generation?
Back to you, Mr. Bush.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes.
For most utilities that aren't spread across a large geographic area, they lose all their renewables every night when the wind doesn't blow. And sometimes it's cloudy in the day and the wind doesn't blow. So I see that Senator Scott has a question. Let's go to there.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, my question for uh, Mr. Bush is, I can understand that his company has got adequate power to meet the needs that they perceive their customers are going to have. And will take steps to get it if they don't have it. What my question is, am I right in thinking that you're sufficiently tied into the Western power grid? So the issue of having adequate power available at any moment is tied not so much to what your company does, but to the adequacy of the whole grid. And if the amount of renewables in the grid gets to be such that they can't meet the power demands under certain weather conditions, am I right in thinking if the grid goes down, your system is likely to go down with it? Is that a correct understanding of the world?
Mr. Bush?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, if I understood the question correctly, we are tied into the grid. We can move power. We make market purchases, things like that. But we also have a generation mix that allows us the ability to serve Cheyenne, at least the basic requirements, without having to rely on too much outside production, if that makes sense. And I think that's what he's getting at. And you know, the rest of the grid, I understand there's concerns around that if the West becomes solely reliant on wind and solar, and none of us are able to move power around because it's not available, I think is what Senator Scott's concerned about.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bush. Senator
Mr. Chairman,
Yep. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, my understanding of the blackout that happened in Ohio, better than a dozen years ago now, not only did the company whose lack of maintenance caused the initial outage go down, but a major portion of the eastern grid, including things in New York City, went down with it. Not that it was their fault, but that's just the tied-in nature of the system as a whole. Is that a correct understanding?
Mr. Bush, if you can.
I'm not sure I can, but I don't remember that specific event in Ohio, but I do know, yes, I mean, there is, the grid can be fragile, I guess, to put it that way. I've got family that live in Louisiana and New Orleans area. They get these massive hurricanes, things go down. It doesn't matter how hard your system is. If you have 175-mile-an-hour winds and flooding and things like that, you're gonna lose power. And at some point, if the transmission lines go down, you can't move power into an area, no matter how good the rest of the grid is. So I think it's fair to say utilities spend a lot of time and planning on trying to make the grid as solid as we can, and to make sure that we can get the power where we need to, and the generation is solid. But at a certain level, it's not infallible.
Thank you, Mr. Bush. Senator Scott, I think it's fair to say that the grid has to respond instantaneously to the changes that happen in the world. And you try to engineer it to do that. You miss things, components fail, people fail sometimes in reacting. And so, but it's really complicated. I think it's beyond maybe anybody in this room, but it's fair to say that you can have events that cascade into a broader connection. But this witness is not going to be able to solve all that for you, sir. And you're still on mute if you're trying to talk.
Mr. Chairman, I understand that, but I do think that what we're talking about with this bill is reliability standards. And I think what we're really concerned about, should be concerned about, is not the coon climbed the power pole and fried himself in the transformer, but the stability of the grid as a whole, and specifically, I think there's a risk of instability due to too much power that is dependent on wind and solar, and that we need to find a way to deal with that, because I think that is an issue that will affect the whole state.
Thank you, Senator Scott. I'm going to take that as a statement and certainly agree with it. Let's see, Representative Wiley.
Mr. Bush, would I be correct to assume that if we look at coal generation or natural gas generation, if those base load power generations aren't held to a minimum, it's not just to flip a switch and turn it on. So if we're not actively keeping that generation to a minimum all the time, when you go to lean on that instead of the renewables, if it's not operating continuously, it's not something that you can just pivot to and keep the system online, correct?
Mr. Bush, if you can.
Mr. Chairman, yes, to a degree. I mean, I think we all know that coal takes a little bit to ramp up. If it's been down, it takes several hours to flip after you flip the switch to get things going, right? Gas is a little quicker, but for the most part, we're running our units nonstop because it's our base load, right? So it makes sense to keep that system going like that.
Representative Wiley.
So I want to go back and kind of look at the Texas event, the learning event down there. If the gas plants would have been running at a minimum, they wouldn't have had such a problem picking up the generation at the time to pivot to that instead of the renewables.
I think that's might be partial. The gas plants are very fast to come online. The situation in Texas, at least in part, was that the deliveries of fuel to the gas plants were interrupted by pipeline issues and compressor station issues. And the fact that the units themselves weren't hardened for cold weather. You know, pipes froze that they'd never had freezing temperatures before and stuff like that. But it's fair to say that it's all interconnected.
Thank you for the education.
And Mr. Chairman,
Bush, did you want to add?
Back on Senator Scott's point. I mean, there's benefits that we all see from our connection to the grid. The ability to move power around, to take advantage of market purchases when prices are down, or issues like that, where operating on an island doesn't really benefit us. The ability to have access outside of the state is critical. Now, we also realize that there are instances where that's not always a popular opinion, but it's something that really we can point to and say our customers benefit from, and what we are charged with is providing reliable, least cost, and I'm missing one of the words there, but power. So that's what we're trying to do to the best of our abilities. There's a lot of regulatory burden that we face from the federal level, certainly by being on the grid and having transmission and things like that from FERC and NERC. They always oversee that.
Why don't you explain those acronyms?
Sorry. NERC is the North American Electric Reliability Council. FERC is the Federal Energy Regulatory
Commission.
Thank you. I was thinking council, but commission. So FERC oversees kind of the nation's energy supplies and grid, and NERC focuses on the electric side. And they're focused on ensuring reliable power, and that we don't get to a point where we are overbuilding on one source of generation, because we could have a situation where pipelines go down and all of a sudden there are multiple gas facilities that can't get natural gas turbines that can't get the natural gas they need to fire up. So that's all happening. And I just want to point out that there's a lot of planning that goes into it. This isn't a willy-nilly thing where we just decide what we're doing. So.
Okay, anybody else? Representative Yen?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Bush, so I'm trying to think, with this bill, we have a penalty, and there's been talk about having a higher penalty. Let's say we have a very high penalty. I'm trying to get around in my head who's going to actually pay for that penalty. If there was a significantly large penalty, would it ever make it in a rate case in Wyoming where the ratepayers would have to end up paying that?
Mr.
Mr.
Bush?
Chairman, I don't think we could do that, no. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a regulatory expert, but I would imagine Mr. Burbridge could probably answer that more authoritatively, but I would think that there wouldn't be any way we could rate base a penalty that we had like that.
I think we could think of a situation where they challenge the penalty, it ends up in court, the company wins, and then the litigation costs of challenging the penalty might end up being a legitimate business expense, but it's kind of far-fetched, but yeah. Anybody else? One last thing before we let you go, Mr. Bush. Your company, perhaps in Wyoming, is extremely unique in the sense that you have an interesting load now, and it's changed greatly. By load, I mean the customers on the system, and specifically, I'm referring to the very large data processing loads that you have, whether it's called Bitcoin or data centers, or that's a huge thing that your company has sought special rate-making techniques to be able to serve that load. What are the implications of that unique load characteristics, which maybe given the size of your utility and the size of that load in this area, we're in the city where most of where that load is, it strikes me that that match may be unique in the country, where you have more of that very, very large data-driven load per the size of your utility or per customer. I don't know quite how to measure it, but proportionally more of that than any other utility that I'm aware of. I wonder what the implications are that for reliability. That's kind of a setup question. I told you that one was coming. Sorry.
It's not a problem, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. So as the committee is aware, and I guess I'll break it up into two answers. So we have our data centers, which are kind of the typical data centers that you would think of with a large company based out of the Pacific Northwest. I think I could say Microsoft. Can I say
You can, our rules provide we can use formal names in committees. It's just that we don't do it on the floor.
Okay. So that large company came here and started operations, I believe, in 2014. I wasn't with Black Hills at the time, but it's about 2014. They're doing their data processing, kind of typical stuff that you would think of. They're expanding. They're opening 2 more facilities here in Cheyenne, and we may have more coming. So very exciting for Cheyenne and Laramie County. A lot of tax benefits and employment benefits from that as well. And then we have the Bitcoin mining, blockchain, however you want to describe them. In the past 5, 6, 7 years, the legislature has done a lot in that space, passing laws to encourage miners and those sort of, and Representative Yin can help me out on this, but the digital tokens and whatever that you want to call it, fintech, whatever you want to call that industry, bringing them to Wyoming to not only incorporate here, but also move their operations here. In 2019, we were successful in passing legislation that would allow us to create a tariff specific to that load, because it is a very, can be a very tricky load. We heard a lot of stories from other states where miners had come in, they set up their computing facilities that use a lot of power, and they started in the Northwest where there was a lot of relatively cheap hydropower. Well, each utility gets an allotment of hydropower. So if that allotment of hydropower, instead of going to your average residence or small business, gets sucked up by the Bitcoin miner, the residence and small business rates go up. So we were trying to avoid that, and there was a lot of talk in the industry about how to do it. Our folks in Rapid City came up with a novel idea to set up this tariff that basically is for these kind of loads. It is above a certain level. I think the tariff is 10 megawatts, maybe it's 8. They can be they can be shut off basically at a moment's notice, interruptible. The power all comes from market purchases. We don't use any of our generation to serve that load, which protects our generation for more typical load. We weren't going to build generation for what we had seen to be in other parts of the country and other parts of the world. Could be kind of a temporary business. People moved around a lot with the mining. Some of that was because they got kicked out of certain areas. Some of it was they got chased out by just the amount of power that they needed. So all of that, this is a really long-winded question or answer. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. All of that comes down to the fact that the Bitcoin mining load that we have here, we announced it last year. It's about 45 megawatts. They're going to be coming up to about 75 megawatts total. And again, Cheyenne is about 240, 250 average per day. So it's a sizable load. The benefits of that are above that threshold of 10 megawatts. There is a certain percentage that is rebated back to our customers. So they share in the benefits of having this load and some reduced rates, things like that. So it's a unique tariff that has worked well for us, but we believe our best in protecting our existing customers from that. If they were to leave, the price of Bitcoin goes down to a point where it's not profitable for them to mine and they shut down everything, it doesn't impact our other customers.
Thank you, Mr. Bush. I appreciate you giving that explanation. It's actually pretty fascinating and perhaps unique in the country. Anybody else? Thank you, Mr. Bush.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Welcome.
Good morning, Chairman Gase. My name is Richard Garlish. I'm the Vice President of Government Affairs for Rocky Mountain Power.
Welcome.
Thank you. Appreciate being here. I won't belabor the points that Mr. Acey and Mr. Bush made. Generally, we're supportive of the idea of the commission providing more guidance to utilities around generation requirements. I share Mr. Bush's view that this is focused on generation that could be helpful, and there's not a need for a focus on distribution kind of reliability as that. The commission has those abilities today. But maybe just in terms of adding to the conversation, I think reliability is an interesting thing. It means something in the context of generation planning and generation dispatch, and also generation transmission and delivery. So in terms of transmission and generation sufficiency and system sufficiency and reliability, that falls under NERC. One thing to note is the NERC requirements under the Federal Power Act impose 1.5 million day per violation per day penalties to utilities who violate the reliability standards. And there's a slew of those for transmission, so 500 kV and above, but also for generator owners and operators, mandates on how you operate and maintain your generation systems and how you deliver to the grid, especially in emergency situations. So it's called EEAs, energy, I forget the acronym, I'm sorry, but essentially energy emergencies in the Western Interconnection, and there's penalties for failure to run your resources to meet those. That's all. I'm happy to answer questions, but we're generally supportive.
Thank you. I didn't recognize you at first, but welcome back to the Corporations Committee.
Thanks.
And make sure I say your name right, Garlish?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Any questions from the committee for Mr. Garlish? Any questions? Thank you very much, Mr. Garlish. Stay close. At least you're not over there in that other affair today.
No.
Yes, sir. Mr. Taylor, welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Sean Taylor with the Wyoming Rural Electric Association on behalf of our 11 distribution cooperatives and 4 generation and transmission cooperatives. The easiest thing for me to do would just say ditto and be done with it. When we were first looking at the bill, we were concerned that this was aimed at distribution. And as you all know, our distribution co-ops, our 11 distribution co-ops in Wyoming don't have their own generation within their service territories. They rely on the G&T. So if this is focused on dispatchable generation, then we're fine. I was going to say, if you were going to look at setting baseload standards for for reliability. Two things, if you ask any co-op in Wyoming or across the country what their mission is, the first thing they're going to say is provide reliable, affordable power. And so reliability is top of our top of our minds. And I think if you were going to set baseload standards, you may have to take the difference between the nature of the rural electric co-ops and the investor-owned utilities into account. But the PSE does that on the distribution level already. So I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Questions for Mr. Taylor? Representative Haroldson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Taylor, so do you guys see anything that could be a unintended consequence? Because we're saying generation's our goal. That's what we're putting our crosshairs on. And the concept behind it is we don't want to get to the point where we lose our base load in exchange for being 100% on as something that we're seeing pushed out of the East Coast, right? But do you see anything in here in the in the wording of this bill that could put us into a place where we could, and I don't ever want to say play the gotcha game, but could be a situation where a distribution issue is addressed when it shouldn't be? Do you see anything that's a red flag?
Mr. Taylor.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Haroldson, I don't. I think the dispatchable power, adequate dispatchable power, kind of captures that. And our, the base load that we own in Wyoming, that the co-ops own in Wyoming, are 2 coal-fired power plants. So, and they're not going anywhere anytime soon, hopefully.
Hopefully. They're not going, but we want them to be running.
Yes.
Anybody else for Mr. Taylor? Mr. Taylor, thank you very much. Your companies do a great job, and they probably have the longest, per customer, they would have the longest amount of transmission and distribution, or it'd be called distribution, but can be a little more significant than the distribution you see in. So they run a lot of long lines to serve a few number of customers. And that's a challenging enterprise, and
Yes, sir.
you guys do a great job.
Thank you.
Thank you. Who else would like to address the committee on this bill? Anybody else? Is there anybody online? Not seeing anything online. Back to the committee. What's your pleasure? Got a motion by Haroldson. Who gave the second? Boner gave the second. Discussion. Is there any amendments? Senator Boner.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I guess we'll take it one at a time if that's okay. The first one would be on page 2, line 16, in between adequate and dispatchable, insert reliable.
Okay, page 2, line 16. Just making sure that everybody has the same versions. That was kind of weird yesterday. But page 2, line 16, between adequate and dispatchable, insert reliable. Is there a second? Got it. I've got it from Haroldson. Discussion? Any discussion? Ready for the question? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that's passed. What else? Haroldson? Who are you pointing to?
Senator Scott.
Senator Scott, you want to make your motion?
Mr. Chairman, this would be a new, I guess, probably subparagraph or subparagraph, I think, would go into the ones that start on page 2, lines 12 through 14. Be a new one. It might be might be D in that list, or the LS one. There might be one there that's not, or more, so it might have a further number down. And it would go in on page 3 after line 7. And Mr. Chairman, what it would seek to do is to have the PSC, when they're considering new generation proposals, considering are they going to go into the rate base, considering the reliability, have them consider the reliability standards. So, Mr. Chairman, what it would read would be in the new, I'll say D, but whatever the letter proves to be, would read, in considering.
So Senator Scott, I personally am having a little trouble hearing, and I think it's because you're moving around a bit. So
Okay.
if you could speak towards the microphone that you're using, that might be helpful.
I'm gonna try, I think the microphone's somewhere in the vicinity of the screen of this thing.
I think
So-
that's probably the best choice, yeah.
Yeah, so, let me try to read the new subsection to you. In considering new or modified generation facilities for inclusion in a utilities investment on which the utility is entitled to a rate of return, comma. The commission shall not allow the inclusion of any facilities generating power that is intermittent in availability if it is likely operation of facilities will result in failure to comply with the reliability standards, period.
So Senator Scott, it kind of dropped out in a very critical point in that, at least for me. I'm going to ask you to do it again from the top, but can you move your paper and put it over the keyboard on your computer? And then I think you'll be talking towards us.
Okay.
Let's try
I'll
that.
try to do that and hope I don't touch the computer up to do things I don't want it to.
Well, I give it another shot from the top.
Okay. And I'll try to go slowly and stop me if Mr. Chairman, you missed a phrase or a
Okay.
word.
I think we got a lot of it, so just go through it again.
Okay. New subsection, whatever the number of the subsection is, or subparagraph. In considering new or modified generating facilities for inclusion in a utilities investment on which the utility is entitled to earn the rate of return, comma. The commission shall not allow the inclusion of any facilities generating power that is intermittent in availability if it is likely operation of the facilities will result in failure to comply with the reliability standards.
Period.
Period.
Staff, do you think you have it? We're going to have a read back from staff. How about just giving us a read back from the top? You don't have to go real slow.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, as I heard it, from starting from the beginning, in considering new or modified generation facilities for inclusion in a utilities investment on which the utility is entitled to earn a rate of return, comma, the commission shall not allow the inclusion of any facilities generating power that is intermittent in availability if it is likely operation of the facilities will result in failure to comply with reliability standards.
Does he have it, Senator Scott? Sounds like he does to me.
Mr. Chairman, yes, he's got it exactly word for word.
Okay, let's see if we get a second. Is there a second to the motion? Is there a second to the motion we've got a second by Ottman. So discussion on the motion.
Mis-
Senator Scott, explain your motion.
Mr. Chairman, what I'm trying to do is, I think this bill is properly focused on generation, as has been discussed. And what I'm trying to do is tell the commission that when they consider, and I think my understanding is they have to approve facilities for inclusion in the rate base. And when they do that, they look to see if that will result in compliance or non-compliance with the regulatory standards on reliability. Trying to give the standards some teeth and keep us from approving facilities that get the reliability criteria we're looking for in generation at risk, so that we can say if you're going to, if you want to build some of these intermittent things and we're getting too much to be reliable, the answer, at least from Wyoming, is no. Give that process some teeth and some impetus to actually implement the standards. And I think that will help make sure that we do keep this exercise focused on generation and the reliability of generation.
Got it. Thank you, Senator Scott. Further discussion from the committee? Further discussion? Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So when I look at the bill, page 2, it seems to me that it is focused on line 18 to 19, new and or expanded intermittent generation. The only thing that I hear new, and this is hearing it because it's been read now 3 times, is the prohibition against a likelihood that an intermittent generation would diminish reliability by not allowing rate recovery for that investment. So I guess the only new thing I see that I don't believe is in what's here is that rate recovery issue. So I guess my query to the good Senator Scott is that consistent with your approach, or do you think yours is truly a different approach to something besides the rate recovery? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I agree that what this really adds is that telling the PSC to use keep it out of the investment base in which a rate recovery is allowed as a tool to enforce the reliability standards. My thought is that if the risk to reliability is too much intermittent generation, one of the ways to get at that is say that we're not going to approve new intermittent generation facilities for inclusion in the rate base if they're going to get us in trouble. I think that's a logical way to start enforcing these reliability standards, and to see that a power company that's motivated by wanting a lot of new facilities in which they can earn a rate of return is forced to pay attention to the reliability standards.
Thank you, Senator Scott. Any further discussion from the committee? Any further discussion? Not seeing anything from the committee. So, Senator Scott, I think in practice, when utilities propose to cover future loads with a mix of resources, including renewables, they kind of propose how they're going to cover the renewables, whether they're running or not. And so it's, they sort of do that already, but I think this is definitely a fair discussion. I think the great hope is that somehow there'll be dispatchable storage in the future that will match these renewable sources, and whether that's pumped hydro or some dramatic improvement in battery technology, nothing of which is here yet. So this might be significant enough that I would look to our utilities that will be impacted by this and think, well, is this workable? Is this anything different than what you have, or does it change your position on the bill? Nobody's jumping up, so, well, they must know what it said. We've gone through it 3 times. I'm not seeing anybody jumping up, so we're gonna go with that. Back to the committee. Ready for the question? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed? Let's see a show of hands. The ayes, please raise your hands. Got 1, 2. Representative Ottman, what are you doing? Are you an aye vote on this or a no vote? Okay, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I think that's the winner for the day, but we can do the noes if you want to. Okay, that motion is carried. Any further amendments? Was there an amendment about the bill title?
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Scott, back to you.
Mr. Chairman, I would ask that we give the LSO staff latitude to make sure that the amendment we just put in is covered in the title.
Fair enough. I think that's typical. And if there's no other specific wording, anything else on the bill? Representative Haroldson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So on page 3, line 7, where we have 37-12-201, that low-level misdemeanor, I would like to insert that I would like LSO to use the verbiage out of 37-2-128 and apply it to electrical generation, not just pipeline. So, and I'm not sure, and I'll be honest with you, I don't know how to do that.
I think it gets recodified in here.
Exactly.
and
So we just
written.
need to take that lower section of 37-128 where it talks about $100,000 per infraction up to $1 million per day per series of infractions, using that verbiage into what we would actually use as a penalty.
Fair enough. Is there a second to that proposal? Second by Boner. Staff, do you think you got it?
I think so. Mr. Chairman, one question for clarification. Would you then delete that existing reference into 37-12-201 and just replace it with this provision? Is that your intent, Mr. Chairman?
Is that your intent?
Mr. Chairman, yes, that is my intent. Just so there wouldn't be, we could at that point eliminate the provisions provided in, but this would actually just be the provisions right there. We put it into that.
Second, agree? Okay, back to Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this maybe is a question for staff. So in the applicability of this penalty clause, is it only going to be applicable under Romanet V, or is it going to actually be applicable under everything under Major Romanet A? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I think as written, it's just for subparagraph A there.
I agree. So would we want to expand that for, and could you do it by saying this a section? What would be the right word? I always get confused. After 30 years, I'm still confused on section, subsection.
I believe it would be for paragraph 5. I think any violation of this paragraph
Senators,
you could do.
Representative, everybody kind of agree with that? Okay, so that would be also friendly, I assume, into your main motion, and the second agrees? Okay, back to you, Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I just want to clarify. So we're still only making applicable to subsection 5. My question for the bringer of the amendment and for the committee is, do you want to make it applicable to all of Romanet A, little a, meaning the entire section, requiring generate specific percentages, dispatchable reliable carbon 2, 3. This is existing statute, and I'm looking at existing statute, but there are the other things that are in there that are also required by the commission. In establishing standards, the commission shall, 1, 2, 3, 4. We happen to be looking at 5 only, and this penalty provision, the way it's now currently being offered, only applies to that Romanet 5. So I just throw that out there as for the committee to understand what we're actually doing
Okay,
with
let's
this
hold-
particular one.
Let's
Thank
hold
you.
on that right now. And Mr. Burbridge, your thought about that, if you wish to offer? You don't have to.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman Case. I don't have a thought on that right now.
Okay. Representative Yen?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Burbridge, has any utility ever violated this? I mean, it's not been in law for a long time, but has anyone ever violated these portfolio standards?
That you're aware of, Mr. Burbridge?
Not that I'm aware of. I would state that we're expecting some filings out of the CCUS legislation as far as establishing reliability standards that would probably set a baseline that would help guide that. But as I sit here today, I'm not aware of any.
Mr. Burbridge, just in a general concept, you work in this area. If we gave this penalty provision to the entirety of a small a, does that cause you any problems? It seems like it expands enforcement ability of the commission at a minimum.
Chairman Case, I don't have a problem with that. It would expand I think it would probably enhance the enforceability of the reliability standards, so.
And if we were to go down that road, we might have to have more conforming to the title. I'm not sure, but you'll figure that out. So with respect to this, is anybody willing to want to offer that? So to replace our expansion from before with a new expansion? Senator Boner's
Sure,
offer?
it's okay if we just vote on the amendment that we have right now and we can have a separate discussion or.
Well,
All right.
we could withdraw and amend, but,
Oh,
so as I understand it, the amendment we have on the table includes putting it in A, B, and C. So everything in 5, I'm sorry. So Senator Boner, if we withdraw it, we could move up to put it on line 4 under A. So if we could withdraw that part, it's okay. We know where we want to get to, right? Let's be clear about that. Senator Boner.
so Mr. Chairman, just to be clear, what we're talking about is, applying the penalty also to the carbon capture provisions. That'd be the difference. We're, expanding what we're doing rather significantly, which is fine. I just get a little nervous doing it on the fly, but, I'm not necessarily opposed to it either. But,
Okay.
But to be clear, that's looking just briefly, as I've had about, 30 seconds to consider this new discussion. It looks like that's basically what it would do to, expand the penalty to the, not just reliability, but also the standards for having a base load of carbon sequestration.
Yeah.
And so that's quite a little bit different. And I just want to note that as we have maybe a whole 2 minutes to think about whether that's a good idea or not. So.
Senator Bono, you're exactly right and very perceptive. It does strike me, thinking about this bill, we have this leeway with this bill when it's in committee. When it becomes introduced, it's restricted by the title. So we would have the ability to go back to our previous kind of thinking about just putting it in Romanet 5. But we don't have the ability, arguably, to go the other way. So it's like you want to go in with a fishing net that's, anyway, that's, Representative, who wants to restate? Or would you restate? You were the original motion. We could all tie it up together.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the original statement was to, on line 6 and 7, remove that provisions for penalty in Wyoming Statute 37-12-201 and reinsert the language out of 37-128 into that area. And then that would basically encompass 37-18-102 little a.
Mhm.
And that would be my
Restate a
revision upon
motion.
my revision upon my revision of my motion. How does that sound, sir?
Okay, well, let's see if we can talk your second into it. Okay. Staff, do you think you get it?
Yes, I think so, Mr. Chairman. If it applies to all of A, I might move it to a different location rather than have it in a subparagraph.
And
Yeah.
is, under the motion, is leeway granted?
Yeah.
Perfect. Senator Scott, I see your hand up. Sorry.
Mr. Chairman, on and for the motion, and I think you were explaining it very well. This is something we can do now. I think this is going to be one of the major bills in the session. And it's dealing with an issue that, I think is extraordinarily important. We passed this motion and the other motion we've already passed will go to the legislature with a as good a package as we can get with plenty of options, and we can whittle them down and compromise uh, during the session. But I I think it's important to give the legislature a full range of topics, and dealing with the enhanced penalties is one of them. So on and for the motion.
Okay, any further discussion? Senator Barlow?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just for clarification, so I understand kind of what staff is thinking. So we're talking about putting in a new Romanet 6, essentially, saying this penalty, and the penalty language that the good representative for, saying this applies to all of this section. Is that accurate? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Anderson?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, it would be a new paragraph 6 and would say any violation of this subsection.
Okay, any further discussion? Any further discussion? Ready for the question? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Got, I heard one no, the motion carries. Back on the bill. Anything else on the bill? Anything else? Would you call the roll on the bill, please? And is Representative Harshman with us? Okay, I just haven't heard from him today.
Mr. Chairman, this is roll call for 24 LSO 0228. Public Service Commission, electricity reliability as amended. Senator Barlow. Aye. Senator Boner. Aye. Senator Landon, excused. Senator Scott.
Aye.
Representative Chadwick. Aye. Representative Haroldson.
Aye.
Representative Harshman.
Aye.
Representative Knapp.
Aye.
Representative Newsom. Aye. Representative Ottman.
Aye.
Representative Wiley. Aye. Representative Yin.
No.
Co-Chairman Case.
Aye,
Co-Chairman Olson, excused.
thank you.
11 aye, 1 no, 2 excused.
The bill's carried forward. Let's take a break. Representative Harshman, I imagine that on your other computer screen, you have a diagram of a gridiron with X's and O's and arrows going everywhere. Good luck.
Yeah, thanks.
No thanks. All right, let's take
Actually,
a
snow plows.
break.
My brother's in
Let's return at 10 after 10.
tonight.
All right, let's call the meeting back to order. And going down our list in the order that we have it posted, the next bill for our consideration is 24 LSO 229, reclamation and decommissioning costs. Mr. Anderson, if you wouldn't mind getting us started.
Sure thing, Mr. Chairman. Josh Anderson, LSO. If you recall, back at the September meeting, this was another one of the bills that we talked about that day. Senator Scott actually took you through this bill, and this was based on a bill that he had run the previous year. It requires the commission to conduct an analysis of certain coal-fired electric generation facilities for future reclamation and decommissioning costs, and also sets the, provides that on page 4, that to the extent that those costs have not been charged in previous rates, that recovery for any additional costs in Wyoming shall be limited to a portion of the cost equal to the portion of the power generated from the facility that was provided to ratepayers in Wyoming. The only changes in this bill from our September meeting, we deleted a reporting requirement as well as a provision on requesting some information. Also deleted in section 2, subsection A, on page 4, some language left over from the previous bill that was not necessary for this version. And then finally, I just wanted to point out, Mr. Chairman, on page 5, you'll see there's a blank appropriation there on the bottom of the page. So we had not determined what that cost might be. So I just wanted to highlight that for committee consideration. And with that, I'd take any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Anderson. Any questions for Mr. Anderson before I go to Senator Scott? Senator Scott.
Mr.
Right.
Chairman, I would like to add to that just a couple things. The genesis of this, the purpose of it, I heard in my community quite a number of people telling me that there were problems at the, particularly the Dave Johnson, but I also heard some of the other facilities dating from their early years when the modern standards of how you dispose of particularly fly ash were not present and were not enforced, that there were problems there that were likely to become expensive. So the purpose of the bill is to nail that down. The intention is, I was hearing from a number of authorities that there had been reclamation and decommissioning costs all along in the rates that were being recovered for the power that was being generated there. So the bill says let's nail that down as to how much they were so we don't have to pay for it twice. And you can see that on page 2, lines starting at line 20 through all of page 3. That's what that's about. And we want to make sure that if there's going to be recovery of additional costs, that the Wyoming ratepayers don't get hit with more than their share of it. My notes are page 4, lines 1 through 9 deals with that. And then, Mr. Chairman, those are very valuable assets. And this bill only covers ones that are essentially going to be retired in the next decade, which includes the older facilities that might have the real problems. If we know what those problems are, we're much more likely to be able to get other uses made of those facilities or their current use continued. If there's this big unknown hanging out as to how much reclamation costs somebody might be hit with, nobody's going to be interested in doing anything but scrapping those facilities. So it's a, I think, essential step to know where we are on that set of issues. Mr. Chairman, that's my summary of the purpose of the bill, and we do need to talk about the appropriation.
Thank you very much, Senator Scott. Back to the committee. Any questions, discussion from the committee? Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my question for Senator Scott is, why not make it applicable to all coal-fired generation, regardless of the date or the two dates, one after the 23rd or 2023 and one prior to decommissioning or et cetera, prior to 2034? Why not just say, we need this, we need to understand this potential liability across the board for all facilities? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Barlow. Senator Scott, did you get that?
Mr. Chairman, the reason for cutting it off a decade from now, there will be some of the more modern facilities that are planned to stay running longer than that. I think there's two things you have to look at. One, the standards for how much cleanup is good enough may well change in the course of that decade. So the further out you get, the less easy it is to predict what's going to be required. Second, the technology and the cost of implementing the technology of how you clean them up is almost certain to gradually change. And you go too far, you say, well, that's nice to know, but it doesn't tell us anything we're going to have to act on. And we know it's going to change, so we just have to do it again at some point. And finally, that date would cover the older facilities that are most likely to have expensive problems, because as in many other industrial facilities, what was considered permissible in the 1950s, 60s, and early 70s, earlier dates, is no longer considered permissible. We've learned too much about the harms that can come. So I don't think it's worthwhile to include all of them going to the ones that will be retired far enough in the future.
Okay, thank you, Senator Scott. Committee, anybody else? Any discussion before we open up to public comment? Anything? Let's open it up for public comment from the commission first, if you have any. Mr. Burbridge. We've given you a lot of work in the past few years, you know. Welcome, Mr. Burbridge.
Thank you, Chairman Case. We appreciate the job security. I had some notes on this, and as I look at the draft bill in its current form, some of these notes may not be relevant anymore, so I'm going to be kind of going on the fly here a tad. I don't see the language any longer that discussed some of these costs being not being paid by the customers of the utility, which at the time raised a hope in Bluefield issue that some of the costs that were talked about in this decommissioning bill would in fact probably be legitimate business costs. And I was just scanning through this again, and it appears that that concern is not here, or I'm just missing it.
Well, there is a section, help me ask, page 4. Let's go to yeah, it's section C. And it does limit recovery.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Barlow, I guess I was reading that to the extent that it was forcing some of these costs into potentially an allocation type situation. When I was speaking of the
you were speaking of disallowance, basically.
Right, that some of that originally these expenses were in my first reading of apparently a previous draft of this, that it appeared that those kind of charges for additional studies would go to the shareholders. And I don't see that direction anymore. So I'm not sure that I have that concern. However, since we're on the topic of the allocation, I'm not sure that I think there might be some pushback under the multi-state protocol agreement if you apply this to Rocky Mountain Power, which would be the utility that would affect, that this, with the way the MSP is drafted, that this could be considered a situs type obligation, and that if any additional decommissioning studies are done, that it would fall solely on Wyoming ratepayers, despite what this statute says. The other issue is that we must recognize that this does not just apply to one utility. This applies across the board to any utility that has generating facilities, or I presume owns part of a generating facility. So you're talking about Montana, Dakota, Black Hills. And so it has a broader reach to it. And so we do have a concern about this bill with regard to the staffing that we have at our office, the cost we don't know what the fiscal impact of this is at this point in time. We do have a pretty good idea that these studies, as they become more granular, there's different levels of studies, 1 through 5, I believe. The studies that have been engaged in by Kiewit are level 3. And if you get higher, the cost goes up exponentially. So we are concerned that this type of a bill will, in fact, will drive up utility rates. These kind of studies are not free by any stretch of the imagination. So those are generally our concerns. I would conclude by stating that it is the Public Service Commission's opinion that the treatment of decommissioning costs and the recovery of those costs has been adequate. It works. It seems to me, and I need to be careful here because I don't want to put any words into the mouths of the commissioners, but that perhaps it's a solution looking for a problem. We've got the accounting on the accounts for decommissioning. We've got the ability to get updated numbers, which in the case of MSP was important when you had on the horizon some states getting out early, and they needed to pay their share of that prior to getting out of the coal-fired generation business, so to speak. And it has been workable in the past. I believe at the decommissioning of the carbon plant in Utah, at the end of the day, there is a true-up that all the participating states or the owners of that plant pay for. And so there's systems in place. We, of course, will do, if this bill were to pass, we will, make more suggestions as we move forward as to what would make it more workable. But right now, it looks to us to be a bill that would cause a increase in expense for the Public Service Commission. It would require additional staffing. We are a small agency, and as Chairman Case alluded to, we certainly have no shortage of work. So we will work with whatever we get, but those are our thoughts. And I have no suggested amendments at this point in time, but if I did have one, it looks like that's been addressed.
Thank you, Mr. Burbridge. It would probably be useful if we filled in the appropriation at this meeting rather than leaving it open-ended. Doesn't mean we can't change that number, but we could put $1 million in there, for example. Are those the kind of costs that you're thinking about, or more? And I realize you don't really know.
Mr. Chairman, we don't really know, although we did start down that path during the last session when this bill came up, and I can see $1 million being on the low end.
Okay.
That I can foresee that it might be higher than that, particularly if, depending on how much stuff we're doing annually, there's reporting requirements and what have you. But at least $1 million.
Fair enough.
That would not surprise me.
And then would you review the situs, non-situs aspect again, the potential pitfalls there? If you
Well-
don't mind, if you don't feel comfortable, that's fine.
I'm going to be careful here so we don't get derailed from the bill itself.
Yeah.
Because the situs, non-situs issue it has basically come up in response to the fact that there's different legislation from different states, different energy policies. Obviously, well, Wyoming's energy policy is much different than that of Oregon or Washington. And they are looking for capital investments, for instance, that might be very different from what Wyoming would be looking for under our energy policy. And the all of the above has the inclusion, as the governor's office is saying, all of the above and everything below now.
Yeah.
And so if a wind facility is being constructed for the purpose of satisfying load growth in Oregon, potentially under MSP, that would be considered situs to Oregon because it's in response to what their energy policy is. Whereas by the same token for CCUS, costs and investment by a utility, that would very likely be considered situs to the state of Wyoming. I will note, though, however, that while the MSP lays these ideas out, it's basically a formula that does not tie the commission's hands to actually following those formulas. The commission is still authorized and is still allowed, even under MSP agreement, to act in the best interest of the public and for the Wyoming consumers. But those decisions, if they stray too far from the formula set forth in the MSP agreement, could result in the further examination as to what steps can be taken amongst the states to address that departure from the MSP. So this is a common misperception with the allocation agreement in this case, that the commission's hands are tied to that, and they really are not. But it is definitely a consideration that you have to keep in the back of your mind.
Thank you, sir. Are there any questions perhaps about the terminology? I'm kind of clear on the situs, non-situs now with an MSP, multi-state protocol. We're good? Thanks. You guys have learned a lot this year. You really have. Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as I looked at the bill draft, and this is going to the appropriation that was the good chairman requested or inquired about, it's page 5, line D, or line 21, D. I also see, though, that on the same page, line 2, it allows the commission to assess the costs of the study to the utilities. So I guess I want to understand what the potential $1 million plus is going for, because I see this as a study coming out of a cooperative effort between the Public Service Commission, the DEQ, which we didn't offer any money to the DEQ to help with their process. But so I guess I need to understand the connection between B, which allows costs to be on the utilities, and D, which says we're going to pay for this. And maybe Mr. Burbidge doesn't know the answer to that. That's legislative intent. I just want to understand if he had considered that in his $1 million potential. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Burbidge, if you can or wish.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Senator Barlow. It is going to require additional staffing. We are stretched very thin. Do I know if it's going to be $1 million or $3 million? No. I mean, there's absolutely no possible way, as I sit here today, that I can give any definitive answer to that. But it will add. I'm reasonably certain that we would need extra staff. I don't know exactly how many to deal with additional decommissioning requirements that this bill would impose upon the Public Service Commission. And I certainly am not in a position to figure out or determine, if we're talking about money out of the general fund versus what our assessment is and how far our assessment can go to cover that. I don't know where we are with that either. So it would really require a more focused effort on our part to come up with a more accurate number, but it's not, I can say this is not going to be free.
So my observation about the appropriation and kind of how it fits in is that this is appropriation for the study to the commission. I guess it's to the commission and DEQ, isn't it? But if the study identifies additional decommissioning costs, that's a different animal. We're not paying for the cost. We're saying, take the numbers you get from the study, recover the cost from the utility, but don't make the Wyoming people pay any more than their share. I mean, I think that's roughly right. Do I have that, Senator Scott? I see nodding, but I also see your hand raised, so I'll go to you.
Mr. Chairman, you've got it exactly right. And I would additionally point out that there's nothing in this bill that changes the standards that govern the reclamation, what's going to be required. My understanding is those are basically federal and we can't change. This is really a question not of allocating costs of new power generation, but of how do you deal with costs that were incurred by previous power generation. And it does have the principle that we'll pay our fair share, but we're not about to pay anybody else's share. And I think that's a good principle to stand on if we ultimately wind up having to go to court to protect the Wyoming ratepayers. I do think that the level of study will depend on the size of the appropriation, because as I understand, we'd appropriate and then we'd recover the cost of doing the studies. So I think that's an issue that we can put in whatever we want, but the appropriations committee is going to decide and bring it to the floor. I think the key here is that there may be some undefined costs, and if we're starting to let people out of paying their share in the future, that gives real impetus to, we've got to get these nailed down so we don't get stuck with things that we should not do, Mr. Chairman.
Gotcha, Senator Scott. Thank you. Representative Ottman, do we need to have Mr. Burbridge stay up here? And you're welcome to. Let's do. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 3, ruminant II, okay, if the commission's unable to reasonably separate the amounts for reclamation that were charged to customers for power for a specific, then it's the total of all the units. If I could just have some clarification there as to what that means. And then in Romanet 3, it says the commission may, to the extent useful, and I think this goes along with the appropriation we're talking about, hire outside consultants and assess their cost to the utility. So if I could just understand how that would work.
I think maybe Senator Scott might be the best person to answer that. Is that okay, Senator Scott?
Mr. Chairman, yes, the reason that was done the way it is it depends on the nature of how the rates were calculated. They may well be able to separate out what would be associated with units in one power plant from those in another, and they may not be. And frankly, I don't know which is the case. So you got to give them an alternative as to how far they can go so they can essentially conform to reality, depending on how those rates were calculated.
And Senator Scott, if I might interject, it might be important to understand that a power plant, when you drive by it, it has separate units. And some of them were built at different times, some were built at the same time. They may be different sizes, but they tend to be kind of modular, like the Jim Bridger plant, for example, the big one by Rock Springs has 4 units that are roughly the same size. And the total is more than 2,200 megawatts, so they're proportional, each one. They actually are a little bit different because they're configured differently. But those units came online at different times. They had their own, fly ash was disposed of in certain ways for earlier units. Maybe they went to new rules later on. So it might be complicated. I think that's what we're getting at, is within the boundary of a big power plant, there might be separate things going on in there. Is that right, Senator Scott?
Mr. Chairman, that's exactly right. And that applies in spades to the Dave Johnson power plant, because the unit 1 there was one of the very first. And that might, that it's smaller than the others, but it was operating in an era where the standards of what you had to do with the fly ash were very different. And Mr. Chairman, the reason for the provision for hiring experts is to sort through what was really recovered in previous rates. You may need to hire somebody who really understands that sort of thing. That may be some fairly specialized accounting help you need. And I think it's very important, or I think it's very likely we're going to wind up paying for some of this stuff twice. I have no confidence in what the ownership of some of these companies might do. They do not necessarily have the best interests of Wyoming at heart. They're capitalists in charge of making a profit.
Okay, thank you, Senator Scott. Is that helpful? Anything else, especially for Mr. Burbridge while he's at the table, and then we get other public comment? Thanks, we'll let you slide. Other
Thank you,
public
Mr.
comment,
Chairman.
please? Mr. Garlish. Welcome back. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Generally agree with Mr. Burbridge. These things their decommissioning costs are in rates today. They're in accounts. The commission has the authority and the responsibility to audit those accounts. So that is in place today. In terms of the decommissioning work itself, there has been studies done already on some of these units and plants, as is normal course. And I don't want to go into the whole federal law thing, but the obligations are quite extensive, and they're updated and applied retroactively to these sites. And the requirements for identifying violations of, pick your acronym of environmental laws, the studies required, the level of cleanup required is all spelled out in law and regulation. And it's typical ordinary course of business. And we've done this before, the carbon plant, as an example of doing a series of analysis on these sites. And there are, I think Mr. Burbridge mentioned, I think there's actually 7 levels that go into at a high level, what was here, what was done, all the way down to taking samples and tests to verify that, and engineering to identify with more particularity as you get closer to the time of closure and decommissioning and remediation, what's going to be required to do the project, if you will, kind of like a cone. And those are very highly technical studies and require engineering work and lots of time and money, quite frankly. So when I read the section about consultants, I took that to mean not only the appropriation that the commission would have to do the analysis on the studies that were done, but also for the studies themselves. And I think it's also important to note that it's been recognized that, the work that goes into decommissioning a plant and remediating a plant, those are ordinary costs of doing business and winding up business at a site that have been recoverable. And it's always a discussion in the MSP protocol about who should pay and how much. But it's also been recognized that there are costs of doing business to decommission a plant, and the people who got a benefit from the plant for the period that it was running also share in the burden of winding that business down or winding that particular plant up. So with that, I would just say that we agree with Mr. Burbridge, and we think this is a solution looking for a problem. But if it's then, if this is law that was to pass, we would do what we needed to do to comply.
Fair enough. Questions for Mr. Garlish? Any questions? Representative Wiley.
Mr. Garlish, how many decommissions has Rocky Mountain Power Pacific Corp done previously?
Mr. Garlish.
I don't have the exact number, but I can get that for you, but I know of at least 2 that have gone through that whole cradle to grave process, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
And Mr. Garlish, how often do those decommissions go beyond your projected cost for closure?
Mr. Garlish.
Thank you, Representative Wiley. That's why I don't know how often, but I think it underscores the importance of doing the cone of detailed studies. Because as you work through your plant, you come to understand what's been there over time. It changes what's going to be remediated. We've had situations where we weren't closing a plant, but we were closing down some facilities on our thing, and we got in there and discovered that there was actually a diesel gas depot that nobody knew about that had to be remediated as part of the cleaning up that we found, but it wouldn't have been found until we got to the point of doing soil samples and testing to find out. So it's sort of an iterative process to determine what the final amount is, and that's why there's the 7 layers of study to get down to that final number.
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
So on the previous 2 that we talked about, did both of those go beyond the projected costs that you guys associated with? I understand that you got to peel it back like an onion because we're talking about different modulars, different times of construction, different areas of certain rulemaking that has come down federally, statewide, whatever. But for these 2 that you've done to date, did both overrun?
Subject to check, they did not overrun.
Mr. Garlish.
Yep. Sorry.
Okay. Anybody else? Representative Yen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Garlish, so, basically what you're saying is that you're essentially already subject to a regulatory burden that covers what this bill is doing anyways, so this is just redundant? Is that what you would say?
Mr. Garlish.
Thank you, Senator Case. Representative Yen. I don't know if I'd go as far as to say it's redundant, but it's a lot of it's already covered in great detail.
Anybody else? Conceptually, if we have a situation where states have different policies, and some states have certainly said that they want to get out of having anything to do with coal at a certain time, and they've said, and we're willing to pay for getting out early, and even those plants continue to run. And I think that's kind of one piece of how this bill works, because at least some members of the legislature say, well, you're letting them out of the deal. They have a payoff that's at that time, but the payoff occurs, or the commitment occurs to costs that are unknown, and that in the future you may find those costs to be much higher, but now you've let a couple of partners out. And so what happens then? I think that's the gist of where this is. And are there other assurances that make this unnecessary? Clawback provisions for the people getting out, or how does that work? Or is that just something where we come to this decision point, these guys want to get out, we agree to get out, and we agree to take it all on in the future, no matter what it is? Help me with that. I think that's the gist of why we're here.
Thank you, Senator Case. I think you make a lot of very insightful points in that. I think that is the challenge and understandable concern is if somebody's, excuse the colloquialism, cashing out.
Yeah.
If they're cashing out their chips and they're walking away, have in that negotiation, have they paid enough to cover the future part of that if it continues to run? And there's also, the counter that, or the argument that, okay, well, after I exit, if you continue to run, it's your state's policy that you want to continue to run and take on the costs and the benefits and the burdens of running forward, then post-closing, or once it's your policy and it's your baby, so to speak, then you rightfully should take on that increment of cost because it was your policy in your state that kept it going for a longer period of time, and you added to the environmental burden. But my environmental, when I cashed out, I was current, so to speak, up to that point. And that is a challenge. I want to acknowledge that that's a challenge. Yeah, and we see that a lot in like even joint owned plants where partners have decided to leave. We have that conversation.
And in that cashing out, that's based on estimates at the time, 7-layer studies, best estimates, best consultants. But sort of the way we have a connection with environmental problems is they never get easier. They get harder. They're more expensive. It's new things come to light. You found the diesel thing. So if you had partners that cashed out early on that, they hadn't paid their share of that meeting that diesel place. So that's, I think, what the gist of the bill is about.
Yeah, may I respond?
Go ahead. Yeah, I'm certainly always.
And I do think that there are some safeguards, and we could probably have a long debate about whether there are enough safeguards.
Yeah.
But there are, some of just the nature of the federal law, basically, if your name is on the title once, you're on there for life. So even if you do move on, you're still subject to the requirements. CERCLA is a good example of that. If you were a party or a partner in a coal plant, and there was waste even discovered down the road, you're going to be on the hook and have potential recourse too. So there are those kinds of safeguards in different federal environmental statutes and obligations. But even though, then it gets back to your negotiation too, about how does that figure into the cashing out we were talking about, right? Do I pay a premium to cover that in the future? Do I do indemnification? There's just a lot to it.
Fair enough. I'm looking around. I'm going to continue if it's okay. So, Mr. Gerlish, if those partners that's had their name on the title, I mean, those are the companies, right? It's not the state of Washington that has their name on the title. The state of Washington is kind of cashing out, and through the MSP and all the agreements, they don't really have their name on the title. We can't go back to Washington and say, we had this agreement, and now we want more money out of you because we found more problems down the road. Even though we ran the plant for 10 years after you left, but those problems came from early on, when they used asbestos for something that we didn't do. Wyoming, who's running the plant, we're not the partners. The partners are companies. And so tell me about the title and the clawback in that situation. Did I just confuse it? I may have, but I'm sorry.
Senator, may I ask a clarifying question?
Sure, please.
Are we really talking about, what I think I hear you're talking about is, what happens in the situation where, the companies, wherever they are, when the state has to step up and be the backstop? Is that what you're asking about?
Not really. I'm just sort of thinking this, just to be explicit, the state of Washington has arranged to get out of coal. They've committed to make payments to make that done, but be done and gone. They're not actually an owner of these plants. The owner is, part owner is Pacific Core, it's Rocky Mountain, however that works. So you said you could, if you ever owned the plant, you could claw back on the obligations resulting from that ownership. But the state of Washington is never the owner. They were the regulatory, their citizens lived there, and they had an agreement. And the question is, we can never claw back on that agreement. But what this bill is saying, Wyoming ratepayers shouldn't have to pay more than their fair share if those costs go up in the future. And Senator Scott, I'm watching you smile, so I think I'm doing okay. And so
Okay.
that's what the gist of this.
So,
Yeah, I'm so sorry. You can always start. I'm asking you a question. You don't have to ask me if you can answer the question.
Okay.
Thank you.
So when we say the state of Washington is out, just to follow the chain.
Yeah.
So they passed laws and say, thou shalt, utility company, Puget Sound Energy, Pacific Core, whoever you are, thou shalt not have coal in rates, meaning if you invest in a coal plant or a thermal plant, natural gas, you can't recover the cost, the return on or of your investment in rates.
Yes.
So that forces then the utility to say, because I can't make these investments, I have to have it out of my rates and replace it with other types of investments that I can recover from under law. So the getting out part is on the utility then to come up with what the cost of removing the coal plant from rates is. So that's depreciation. You're going to accelerate your depreciation. You're going to accelerate other things that are on your books to get them off your books and out of your rate base. But I would assert, and I have to have this conversation because you might be able to school me about this, but part of that is what's always been a reasonable cost of doing business is the environmental decommissioning reclamation, because that was part of what was collected in everybody's rates for that, because the regulatory construct presupposes that even under, without policy aside, things don't run forever and you have to be decommissioned and remediated and cleaned up. So those costs are in rates and have to be part of this settling up and cashing out. So that's the scenario of a utility that's being forced to leave by their state policy. A utility that's being told by another state to stay in, right? You've now got the benefits of that plant and also the corresponding burden of it. So you've got all the cost of operation, the cost of fuel, the cost of maintenance, the cost of your share, your previous share of environmental remediation costs. And then this is where I think we get into the rub. So now you run for 10 more years, right? And so one argument would be at the end of this 10 years, Wyoming, in this example, Wyoming shouldn't have to pay any more than it did for those 10 years. The counter argument from other utilities as part of cashing out is going to be, you were going to run it for 10 more years.
You could have closed it then, right?
You could close it, but you're going to choose to run it for 10 more years. And so whatever, even the pre-existing liabilities that exist on the plant, you're going to be contributing to them. So they're not new problems, not the discovery of radioactive something under there, but just your regular course of emissions and managing groundwater and all those kinds of things. You're just going to be adding to the cost for the 10 years that you as a state chose to run it and have that utility have it in their rate base and recover those costs and rates. I think that is how it works. And what I was trying to acknowledge is that's a pretty live and ongoing debate of when we get to that inflection point of where we're going to part ways, one utility, one state is going to stay and one is going to go, do you have to pay just what you incurred between 1972 and 2015, or do you have to do more than that? And then it gets complicated. There's arguments back and forth on both sides.
I think we're having them. I think this has been really good.
Yeah, we have those arguments back and forth on each side and there's points to be made on both sides, right? There's federal law. Of course you're on the hook. Yes, I'm on the hook until the point that I left. No, you're not. It goes back and forth. So then bringing that back around to the bill, and I think the question is, does the bill help with that rub or not? And as I sit here today, just the language that's here, I don't know that it does, because I don't see, I just don't see exactly how it gets to that, kind of negotiation of how much is enough to cash out, in my probably too colloquial example, but
I think it's really fair. I think what we might be saying is there's never enough to cash out. There's always a residual. And you're exactly right. You've characterized this very well. And it's two ways of kind of approaching the situation in that inflection point.
I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead.
And to be fair, I think it's a legitimate concern by everybody about, what is the unmitigated risk in the future? Is there one? Is it big? Is it small? And how do you mitigate that? So that's what drives some of that behavior of I want to give you, based on this study, I'm leaving in 2022. And so based on this study, and I recognize I've been in it since 1950, but what I think I owe you is this based on my view of what that outsized risk is. And I think if they're also on the counter side, the fair criticism of you should pay more because you're going to run it for longer.
And I think just from what Wyoming's point of view might be, we're willing to say, we'll take on everything that's a consequence of having running it past our parting of ways. But if that plant was built in 1950, we've been together and we discover a consequence that was unknown, that was in 1955, they buried Jimmy Hoffa there. And we find out that there's some consequence of that because he's in a radioactive casket. I'm just making humor because it's very dry. Then when you exited, nobody knew that. It was the best things of the deal. But Jimmy Hoffa was there in a radioactive casket, and you have to pony up now. We got to all deal with this together. And we'll deal with our fair share. You do your fair share, because it was something that happened before we parted ways. That's where we're trying to get at.
Yeah.
And at least we understand it.
Yeah, I think that that's fair. And
Yeah.
I guess I'm just saying on this bill, I'm not sure that it quite gets there.
Fair enough. Really appreciate the conversation and the company. I'm sorry, talked too much? Anybody else? Anybody else? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else want to weigh in on this bill? Anybody else? We got two online. Let's take them. Okay, let's go with our good friend Patrick Sweeney. First.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman Case. First off, my name's Pat Sweeney from Casper. I am representing myself. Although I'm a registered lobbyist, I do not have a client, and I am strictly speaking on my own behalf. Great conversation, Chairman Case, and left me with a couple of comments. And to that end, I think Senator Barlow's comment about including all publicly regulated coal-fired facilities might not be a bad idea in looking at this. I know that may not be the favor of some, but it might be worth looking at. As to page 3, line 21, starting there, the ability for the commission to be able to hire an outside consultant, I think that it's going to be necessary if this bill proceeds because of the complexity with the multi-state protocol, as Mr. Burbridge mentioned, and Mr. Garlick. I think there's a lot of complexity. Then over to page 5, starting on line 2. So the Public Service Commission shall assess the cost of the study to each public utility subject to the study under this section of the pro rata basis as determined by the commission. So I think the question in my mind there, and Mr. Burbridge kind of touched on it and felt that he was okay, but I don't want this to come back on the ratepayer in the end. And I think that leaves the door open, possibly, to the different utilities to be able to recover cost, just like we've seen with carbon capture. The other thing that seems to me in all of these comments thus far is that we have not, I've never seen or been privy to knowledge of these accounts that are there that the Public Service Commission had referenced through Mr. Burbridge and Mr. Garlick also kind of reference that they're there. I've been privy, thanks to Senator Scott, to some meetings. I believe Senator Boner was there, Representative Chadwick, myself, and others, where we've been told there's money there, but I don't know if anybody's seen the numbers. So perhaps if we could, somebody, maybe the executive branch, has seen those numbers. But I would think somebody on this committee, that's a fair question to ask. And maybe that would alleviate all of our concerns, perhaps. And are those numbers broke down by facility and per unit? Or is it just a great big huge pot of money someplace sitting in somebody's account? Somebody must know the answers to that. Or will the study actually derive those numbers, Mr. Chairman? I'll also draw your attention to page 5, line 21, about the appropriation. I think there's really been some good clarifying questions from the committee and some answers that it's twofold. Depends on the commission. And then also, I do think the commission has long been understaffed and fought on the floor for the increase because of everything coming down the pike, not related to this and not related to some of the current cases. But that appropriation should be large enough so they can hire a couple of folks to oversee the consultant. So I don't know if $1 million is going to be enough, but I think it's money well spent in these cases. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate your time and good work. I do still believe that Senator Scott is on the right track and the committee is on the right track. And nothing against any of our good utilities, but we're in a different spot, different place, and we do need to dig in to where we're at with the other states. And if this helps clarify that, I ask for your favorable consideration and appreciate your time this morning on a cold day from Casper. So
I thought you were going to say a cold day in somewhere else, but Representative Sweeney, thank you very much. I just a little bit of housekeeping. I'm not sure if you said Mr. Garlish's name correctly, and we want to be very. The company's been very good, and Mr. Garlish has been very good. It's Garlish, and I thought you said garlic, but
I'm a little slow, Mr. Chairman, on the uptake this morning, so I apologize.
Well, I don't think you would have had it written down, and we've had it written down. So it's Garlish, and with regard to the accounts, I don't know if anybody wants to address that. I speculate that in none of these instances is there money just sitting in an account. And whether how it's calculated and divided out, I know that there are people both at the Public Service Commission and at the companies that could help us to show what's there and how it's calculated. But I don't know if anybody wants to address that, but I guarantee you there's no money in account. And I guarantee you the guys in the room right now can't answer this question, basically. And they're nodding their heads, both at the commission and Mr. Garlish. So we could get more information about that. And maybe we could request it of Mr. Garlish a little bit more how that happens and who would be responsible and how that is broken down.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That does clarify. And it sounded to me just from testimony this morning, that possibly there were accounts. And so I appreciate that clarity, Mr. Chairman.
And Representative Sweeney, it might be that's terminology. When we say there's an account, it's a bookkeeping thing. It's not a bank account with that specific amount of money in it. They just don't stick it. So it's an account in your books. And utilities use a book called the Uniform System of Accounting, specific to utilities, but it's the same as general accounting, and for the most part. So yeah, accounts don't mean bank accounts necessarily. Mr. Garlish, I think, is gonna help us a little bit with that to the extent he's able. And but we can't answer that question today about most of that. Anything else? Anything for Mr. Sweeney? Let's go to Ms. Anderson. Welcome, Ms. Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Shannon Anderson on behalf of Powder River Basin Resource Council, up here in the frozen north part of your state today, where there actually is an orphan coal plant. So in my county of Sheridan County, there actually is the Acme coal plant. It's sitting on the landscape still, not decommissioned. Taxpayers have had to take on that responsibility through our conservation district here. So we're very well aware of the potential issue and problem. However, I don't think this bill goes to what you think, that problem could be into the future. And I'd like to really focus you on section 2, page 4, Romanet A of your language, where what is covered by the study. So we're looking at a facility that is or potentially may be, which language I think we would need some discussion around, subject to this act, including any facility that was closed, retired, or converted to a new fuel source after January 1, 2018. As we sit today, Mr. Chairman, there's not a single coal plant in the state that would be subject to this. When we kind of think through the coal plants that we have in the state, some specific examples that come to mind for me, we think of Bridger units 1 and 2 that are being in the process of converted to natural gas, but they haven't yet been converted to natural gas. So, is the was triggered or not at this particular point in time? I'm not quite sure. We think of Naughton units 1, 2, and 3. Unit 1 has been converted to natural gas. But is it a facility or is it a unit? What is the facility? That goes to the question and the complexity around a coal facility and a coal plant versus individual units of that coal plant. Units 2 and 3 at the Naughton coal plant will be converted as well. Most likely, they haven't yet. They're just proposed to be. There's also, I think, a conversion potentially of some of that facility and being reused by the proposed nuclear power plant. So how that kind of falls into here, I'm not quite sure. Black Hills has a coal unit, Neil Simpson unit number 2. Just recently, they've announced that they would like to be able to run that unit both on coal and natural gas. So it's being converted, but it's also remaining a coal plant. So does that unit, is that subject to this study? So I think when you get down to the details of what plants we're studying and why and what time scale, it gets very, again, this bill isn't really solving anything I think that we really need to solve. There's also, again, we've discussed a question of timelines, engineering studies, decommissioning studies, the most recent numbers, the better, right? And if we're looking at 10, 15 years down the future of when the facility will actually be decommissioned, because just because it's being converted to natural gas doesn't mean it's being decommissioned. In the case of Bridger, we're still going to run that plant for a decade longer. So why are we doing a decommissioning study now where the numbers aren't going to be that informative to what actually happens with that coal plant when it's actually decommissioned and taken off the landscape? So those are just, our questions. And again, I think the conversation that you've had heretofore this morning about ratepayers will still pay for these studies. It's going to have a rate implication for customers. So let's make sure we're doing something that actually benefits customers in Wyoming, and not just do studies for the sake of doing studies, but really make sure that we're informing where we need to go and protect not only Wyoming ratepayers, but also our organization has a strong interest in the environment and making sure these facilities are properly decommissioned and reclaimed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Those are my comments.
Thank you very much, Ms. Anderson. Questions for Ms. Anderson? None from the president. I see Senator Scott, your hand's up. Questions for Ms. Anderson? Can you put it down? That way, when it comes up again in the future, I'll know that it's new. Okay, anything else for Ms. Anderson? Thank you, Ms. Anderson, very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, anybody else? Not seeing any, nothing online? We've heard. No, I don't see anybody else in the audience or any other agency. So with that, committee, you've heard the testimony. What's your pleasure? Senator Scott?
Mr. Chairman, move the bill.
Motion by Scott. Is there a second? Got a second by Wiley. Discussion.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, speaking of the appropriation, listening to the Public Service Commission, I think there's a confusion over the degree of study that's being required here. Frankly, I think they're envisioning going back and doing some of the studies that are already required federally, and that's not the intention at all. What I really want to do is have some consultants take a look at what's been done already and say, what's it really mean to us? What's it telling us? Are there some things they might have missed that we will have to go to? And you can see on page 5, just before you get to the appropriation, we're wanting an interim report on September next year, which may include a request for additional appropriation to complete a study. That's if they find something that's just been missed and not considered so far. And I think that's if you might run into big money, that's where you might run into big money, but it would be then something we would need to spend. Frankly, I think that something in the vicinity of $250,000, $250,000 would be an appropriate appropriation, unless the accounting for where we're trying to figure out how much got paid in early for reclamation, so we don't have to pay it again. If that gets more complicated, that could be costly too. But I think that with what's outlined in what we're really looking for in the bill, that a smaller appropriation is the appropriate thing, Mr. Chairman. That's the way to keep that from reinventing the wheel on studies. I don't want to do that, but I do want to have an outside professional look at what has been done to see what its implications really are and to see if something has been missed.
Is that a formal motion to make it $250,000?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make that motion.
Okay, do we have a second? I mean, it's just a pretty simple amount of money. We could everybody on this table could just give up a day's pay and we could cover that, right? Is there a second for $250,000? Does somebody have we can deal with another amount later. Right now, we don't have a second. Let's leave it open, Senator Scott.
Okay.
Any further discussion on the bill? Any other discussion? Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I have two, I guess, form questions for Senator Scott. One, Senator Scott, this both has a codified and a non-codified section to the bill because this is basically time limited and short in duration. It seems like that I'm concerned, I don't know the necessity, or if you have a necessity for having a codified section, because it seems to me, with the exception of some of the details, the non-codified section is actually where the work takes place. And so that's my first question. The second question is, I do want to understand in both sections, both 1 and 2, there is the ability for the commission to assess the costs of the study to each public utility on a pro rata basis. So I want to understand how that fits with the additional, in section 2, the additional appropriation that is in subsection D. And then I'll have a couple more questions based on those answers. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Scott, can you help us out?
Mr. Chairman, on the codified versus non-codified, I don't have strong feelings. That's the way it was drafted. If you want to make it all non-codified, there's a pretty good argument for that. I don't think it makes a lot of difference one way or the other. With regard to recovering of the costs, my vision was that you'd appropriate the money and then the PSC would, with the language at the top of page 5, assess those costs to the public utility, and that would go to reimburse us for the appropriation. That's my vision of it. There may be others with a different opinion.
Back to you, Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator Scott, for both clarifications. So with that assessment ability, it is it's my understanding, based on the conversations we've had today and in previous meetings, that that would be a cost passed on to Wyoming ratepayers, that could be passed on to Wyoming ratepayers by the utilities if they are so assessed. I just want to know if that's your understanding, or you think there's a different understanding of that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Scott?
Mr. Chairman, I think there's a chance that might well be passed on to the ratepayers. I think if we can save the ratepayers having to pay twice for this reclamation, and I think that's a very real risk. I think the ratepayers are going to wind up ahead on this.
So you know the companies are going to put it as a separate item on the bill. Our good friends in Utah are good at that, and
yeah,
you know they'll do that. Yep. Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this hopefully will be my final question. So, and I thank you, Senator Scott, for the clarification about the degree of study that's being requested here. I think much of what you're talking about is an audit of current studies, of current liabilities, of current things, and then to find out where there may be holes in the various levels, and try to understand the costs, and from there, impute is the word I think used in the bill, impute where there is a liability, an ongoing liability. But this, I want to be clear, based on the conversation, this is from a point in time when the study is conducted, looking back to know what's been collected. And then we have to make a different policy discussion about going forward, or the commission would have a different policy discussion about how you actually stay whole going forward. Is that accurate? 1, on the audit type approach, and 2, on the point in time retrospective versus prospective. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Scott?
Mr. Chairman, on the taking a look at the reclamation, the actual reclamation issues, you could describe it as an audit. I wouldn't, because I'd be scared somebody would think we were trying to hire an auditor. And I think what we need is consultants who are experts in what does it really take to get a decommissioning done, know the federal laws, know the things to look for, the pitfalls that there are. So it's a different kind of professional. But you could sure describe it that way as what's really going on. With regard to the look back on the rates, that is much more of a financial audit, see what was set aside so that we don't have to pay it again. That's the purpose there. Does that answer the question? I may have not understood the second part of your question.
Senator Barlow has indicated he's satisfied. Didn't say he was happy. He said he's satisfied. Any other discussion? Any other discussion? I'm about to call for the question, but we have a bill without an appropriation. Is there an alternative number? We'll go back to the 250,000. Anybody want to offer anything? Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I guess I got three things. I don't know if you want to, let's take them maybe one at a time. Well, let's take the financial, if I could, Mr. Chairman, one at a time.
Okay.
I think that the interest in this is the state of Wyoming understand the liability that is implied toward ratepayers, both retrospectively and prospectively. And if the state of Wyoming believes this is something that is important, so the ratepayers don't double pay, I'm not comfortable with assessing the cost of the study. So I'm going to do two things. I'm going to strike the assessment of cost for the study to the utilities, and I'm going to ask for $500,000 in the appropriation line. So $500,000 to appropriate and strike in the two sections the ability to assess the cost to the utilities. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Fair enough. Is there a second for the
Mr.
motion?
Chairman, second.
It's got a second by Scott. He knows when half a loaf is a good thing. So discussion. You understand it, Senator Yen, or Representative Yen?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So I think beforehand, this bill didn't really affect me or my constituents, and now it will more, right? So we're spreading the cost out to the rest of the state, to people who are not ratepayers under utilities that do not have generation facilities. So I'm excited to vote no on this bill.
Well done, Representative. Well done. Representative Wiley.
Mr. Chairman, I know we're getting hung up on these utility rate hike costs and stuff, but one way or another is going to come around and hit our constituents in the pocketbook. If we have to go back to conservation districts or to counties to do this reclamation later and it gets left in the state's hands, we're going to pay for it one way or another. So we might be money ahead on investing now into knowing what we're really going to grapple with. I mean, this could potentially be billions of dollars we're talking about. So that's something to consider.
Thank you, Representative. Anybody else? We've got a motion and a second. It's to be $500,000 to be paid for from the general fund. No further discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. I got to do the show of hands. All those ayes, raise your hand. Got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Harshman's a yes. Thank you. That's 7. You want to call for the noes? I can count. But we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 7 to 4. So the motion is passed. Back to you, Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My second motion is conceptual, is I'd like to make this all non-codified statute. Seems like with the effective date immediately and the final report being in 2025, based on this, that in the entirety of the bill, that none of this needs to be codified. And I don't think Mr. Anderson may have a different view, but anyway, that's my query is there a reason to have anything codified? Thank you.
Senator Scott, I see your hands up, but let's go to Mr. Anderson first. He's always trying to keep us from driving off a cliff.
One question is, I think because it would affect, future rates, and I don't know if it's time limited, subsection C on page 4, where you're dictating how much Wyoming ratepayers would be on the hook for any future costs not covered. I think that's something you might want to have in statute, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Senator Scott, did you still want to make a point?
No, that's
Okay. So we don't have a motion. He's withdrawn the motion. Okay, anything else? Anything else on the bill? Sort of a general principle on the bill. I think there's some flaws in the bill. But if we don't pass something forward, we don't have a tool to work with when we get to the session and as things come together. So I'm happy to support the bill going forward with the notion that, well, with the notion that it'll be a tool that possibly will be useful later it also kind of telegraphs what we're thinking, and that's good. We're in some very significant high-level discussions, you might say, or just looking at each state's actions of these 6 states that are part of the Rocky Mountain Power Territory. And states are trying to muscle their way to have their own policies, and we've kind of got to come together on all this, and this might help us to get there. I don't know. So, but I'm going to support it. So anybody else? Welcome to spout off if you want. I'll call for the question. Roll call.
Mr. Chairman, this is roll call for 24 LSO 0229, reclamation and decommissioning costs as amended. Senator Barlow? Aye. Senator Boner? Aye. Senator Landon, excused. Senator Scott?
Aye.
Representative Chadwick? Aye. Representative Haroldson? No. Representative Harshman?
Aye.
Representative Knapp?
Aye.
Representative Newsom? Aye. Representative Ottman?
Aye.
Representative Wiley? Aye. Representative Yin?
No.
Chairman Case?
Aye.
Co-Chairman Olson, excused. 10 aye, 2 no, 2 excused.
Thank you very much. That bill is passed. Just have to decide where it goes. Just by way of a funny comment, I noticed the 2 no's are a bit on different sides of the spectrum. And I, same side of the room, but I kind of love that, actually. We must be somewhere in the middle. We must be somewhere in the middle. I don't know where. Anyway, so this bill's not done yet. It's not a big panic. It's a chance to have discussions, and they've been good discussions this morning. So with that, let's keep going and try to take up another bill before we break for lunch. So the next bill for our consideration, find my cursor, is 24 LSO 232, electricity rates for costs that do not benefit Wyoming. Mr. Anderson, is this you too? Not the band, but you as well.
Mr. Chairman, so again, this is another bill that was first discussed at our last meeting in September. It was amended slightly and then moved forward to this meeting. So the intent of this bill is to provide that costs that do not benefit Wyoming ratepayers may be excluded from the costs that are apportioned to Wyoming. The change that was added at our last meeting on page 2, line 8, we added the phrase to meet a specific mix of electricity generation technologies that are required by other states or entities outside of Wyoming. So that was the change to the bill from the last meeting, Mr. Chairman. I take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Any questions for Mr. Anderson? Thanks a lot, Josh. Okay. Any questions from the committee? Any preliminary discussion? Senator Scott?
Mr. Chairman, question for Mr. Anderson. My reading of this bill is that it is a complement to the one we talked earlier and agreed to on reliability and doesn't supplant it, that the two go hand in hand sort of as a team. Is that your reading of the bill? There isn't a conflict, is there?
Mr. Anderson, if you can, I'm not sure that's an answerable
Mr.
question.
Chairman, I would agree. I don't think there's a conflict between the two bills.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, how they fit together, I think we'll find out as we move forward. Questions from the committee, anything? Let's open it up to public comment. Who would like to start? Mr. Burbridge, welcome. Just think, you could be over at the commission and be in a stuffy room full of people and be talking about electric utility issues. And here you are in a stuffy room full of people talking about electric utility issues.
And with the person in a bird suit.
Yeah, no bird suit here.
Right. We really don't have a position on this bill. We think that it doesn't really change anything that isn't already going on. So I would just stand for questions.
Any questions for Mr. Burbridge? So just to be fair, you say, well, this is what we do anyway?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Burbidge. Anybody else wish to testify on the bill? Mr. Acey. The trap is set. Welcome, Mr. Acey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Bruce Acey. I'm here today on behalf of Montana Dakota Utilities Company. And sometimes it's really not worth the walk to the front to say this, but to echo what Mr. Burbidge said, and that is, we've reviewed it and we don't really have an objection to it other than to indicate that it really doesn't advance the ball very much, because this is essentially what is done anyway. As I've indicated before, Montana Dakota provides services in northern Wyoming. It's part of a 5-state network, and our headquarters are in Bismarck, so there is allocation of costs that relate to the services that are provided, particularly with corporate services in Bismarck, and then allocations that go forward. The commission and in all of our rate case proceedings makes this allocation to try to be fair to ratepayers in Wyoming and the other jurisdictions, so that they don't have unrecovered costs, and that in fact consumers in Wyoming are paying their fair share, which is what this bill does, but which in fact, for all the time I've taken this morning in saying this, is what is happening already. But thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Acey? Thank you, Mr. Acey. Mr. Garlish, welcome.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Richard Garlish, Rocky Mountain Power again. I just wanted to walk up here to say me too. This bill, we're not opposed to it. We think it does essentially what happens today, and agree with Mr. Acey and Mr. Burbidge, but we don't oppose it.
Stay close. I enjoy visiting with you. So, yeah, we've got Representative Haraldson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Garlish. So one of the things, I hear what you guys are saying, but one of the things I think we need to understand is a big part of what we're doing is perception. Because the people are out there going, hey, we're standing on this, and we're not diving into a rate increase, but we're standing on this, we're having this conversation, and they want to know without a shadow of a doubt that when they pay their utility bill next month, they're not paying for another state's decisions.
And I think it's okay to discuss the pending rate increase. We really can't do that with Mr. Burbidge, but
yeah,
we can talk about it. So.
And I think that it's something that this is what the commission does, and we appreciate that, but we also want it to be a deal that this is what it'll always do. We're stating this is a statement that, hey, you know what, if another state says that all you can do to generate power is to burn corn husks, we're going to sit there and go, well, that's your prerogative. It's not going to be reliable, nor is it going to be cheap, but you can keep doing that type of deal. But for us, we're going to do it differently. And so I think that's just, I understand you guys saying, hey, we agree this is happening. We don't have a problem with it, but kind of whatever. There is a point as the legislature that we need to stand in a gap right now and say, hey, we do care about these rates. We do care about what they look like, and that we're going to stand in the way. Do you think would you agree that that is a good approach as we move forward as we have these conversations?
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead, Mr.
Haraldson.
Garlish.
Yeah, just a couple of observations. I didn't mean to minimize it at all by saying this is what the commission does. The commission does a very important thing and make sure that, they hold, not just Rocky Mountain Power, but all utilities accountable for providing safe and reliable service. I think we're entering into an interesting time, especially for Rocky Mountain Power that operates in 6 states. There's an increase in Wyoming isn't the only state that's concerned about the sovereignty of its energy policy and what's important to it. We see that across our service territory, Utah, Idaho, and even Washington and Oregon. And they are doing the same things, considering the same things that you all are about, how do you move forward an energy policy that respects the state's sovereignty and its goals and what it thinks is the right thing to do for its constituents and its customers. I think, so against that backdrop, it gets into, the mechanics of the rate making and things like the MSP, which I don't necessarily want to put on trial right now, because that's a big discussion. I'm happy to talk about it, but I just have a shelf of knowledge about it. But it comes down to the allocations and, what the state directives. So, in my position as the regulated utility, if I have a law from state X that says thou shalt do this, and a law from state Y that says thou shalt do this, when that goes into the multi-state protocol, it gets to be a discussion of, what are the burdens and what are the costs of that, the benefits, the burdens and the benefits. And different states have different ideas and should about, if you'll forgive me for being just kind of candid, where they want to pay their money and where they want to take their chances. And that's the right energy policy and decision-making for this body and the PSC to move forward. And I think the PSC does that, and there's existing mechanisms, and we can debate about what's missing from them or how they could be improved. But it's important. So I just want to be clear, I'm not minimizing the fact that this is reiterating that that's not important.
Thank you. Representative Newsom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and this is kind of for all the folks that have testified. So you all stated that you would do this already. And so is this a part of a best practices, or is this a part of a regulation by federal government or by the PSC, or so it seems that it's consistent with all of the utilities that have testified that this is common practice. And my question is, why is this common practice? Thank you.
Mr. Garlish, you want to take a crack at that?
Sure. So in our case, Representative Newsom, I think it goes back to the fundamental, what we call the regulatory compact, which I think for those of us who kind of live in the wonky utility world is a backdrop of everything that kind of we do. And that's the fundamental deal of in exchange, traditionally the electric utilities have been a capital intensive business. And in order to get the economies of scale and to build out facilities and keep rates low, you needed to have that deployment of capital, the return on it, and some kind of guaranteed, you get your cost back plus a return. And that has been like the fundamental deal, compact, regulatory compact that's been in place for a long time. And so,
and you might weave used and useful in that.
Oh, yes. And so I was just going to get down to, so how do we live in that deal and hold each other accountable? And that's where the importance of the Public Service Commission and the OCA and consumer advocates come in to hold the utility accountable. Yes, you get to recover your cost of doing business plus a return, but in exchange for that, you have to show us your books and your records. You have to show us that all of your investments that you've made in generation and transmission and distribution are used and useful. So the people that are paying for those investments and rates and those costs are getting the benefit, being the safe and reliable service out of them. And so this we're talking about in this context, in my view, is the mechanisms that the PSC looks at to review things like general rate cases and investigations and audits and all the tools that they have as a statutory body to drill in and say, are utilities really acting in the best interest of customers, providing safe and reliable service at the most affordable rates possible, and prove it to me and show me that your decisions were prudent. So this, in my mind, that we're talking about is that exercise that we go through at the commission with all of their different mechanisms they have at their disposal to prove that we're being prudent in making those investments and recovering those costs, and then overlaying consistent with the energy policy of the states we operate into.
Good. So I think there's a wrinkle in all of this that we have and I'll address this to Mr. Garlish, but and I just use real examples of what's impending before us. Rocky Mountain Power is finishing the construction of 2 major transmission lines into Wyoming, Gateway West and Gateway South. They're huge. One of them is partially in the test year that's forecasted test year, I guess. But the other one isn't even in there yet. And so the rate proceeding that's happening right now has a little bit of those costs, but most of those costs are going to be in the future when those transmission lines are brought in. It's a huge investment. The question is, right now under the multi-state protocol, those lines are shared. Wyoming pays part of the cost of those lines. And the company's done a very good job of trying to say that there is some benefit to those lines for Wyoming. This is where I part company with the company. We're not in the case. We can talk about this, but this will be an issue in the case. But the commission's already kind of approved the multi-state protocol that says, Wyoming, you're going to pick up 15% of the cost of those lines. I'm sitting here telling you, we got along fine without those lines for years. And our load is not growing. Our load is going to be smaller than it was in the old days. But those lines are being built for the purpose, major purpose of taking renewable energy out of the state of Wyoming and taking it elsewhere. Now, that power's really, we don't need that power. Our customers don't need that power. Our growth doesn't justify that power, on and on and on. And I'm certainly going to give Mr. Gerlich a chance to respond. He's not the witness on this issue. But the president of Rocky Mountain Power in the hearing the other day said, well, those lines do help Wyoming, and they've gone to, but it's kind of a tortuous way. I mean, if you were to measure the electron flows in a year, you'll find that we might have got power back a couple times, depending on a particular situation. Or it's possible that there was coal-fired power plant from Dave Johnson, possibly, who was able to get out that wouldn't have been able to get out at different various times before. And the company's going to, they're going to show that. But it's, I contend, that this is my contention, that's only about 1% of the total volume of the line that's taking power out. And so why do we have to pay for 15% of those? And is that, and everybody can say, I think that's the perception difference. I would love for our law to talk about the reality of that. The truth is the regulatory process talks about the multi-state protocol and the fact that those lines, the commission's going to find that they're used and useful. Do you think they're used and useful for Wyoming? I don't. I think we're getting screwed. I'm sorry, that was vulgar, and I apologize. I think we're getting hosed by that's vulgar too. I can't even think of a right word. We are not benefiting from that in any proportion to the costs that our ratepayers are being asked to do. The company will disagree. This is a fundamental piece of this case, and I would be totally remiss not to give Mr. Gerlich a chance to respond. But I think there's a perception difference about what this bill does, or what the legislature or what the people of Wyoming might think this bill does. And the reality is it does exactly what they all said. It does exactly, the words say what the commission already does. And I don't know how to bridge that gap. I really don't. But I think I'm the right one as we go forward. Mr. Gerlich, that's just me. And by golly, you got a wide open truck.
Well, thank you, Senator Case. I think I'd like to just start by making a distinction between, the process of regulation and its mechanics and the particulars of a case.
Yeah. That's
And
probably smart.
First, the distinction of, these regulatory mechanisms that this bill speaks to and the things that the PSC does today shouldn't be minimized. And I know that you weren't trying to minimize, but respectfully, they shouldn't be minimized because they're important. There's a lot of trained economists and staff and professionals that go over everything we do with a very fine-tooth comb, with a commitment about what is in the best interest of ratepayers. So a lot of scrutiny, and it's an adverse, contested case process where we can't just say, we want to do this, we're going to do it, we're done. We got to prove it. We got to put our money where our mouth is, and we got to present the evidence. And so those mechanisms are very important. So what the commission does today and what would be repeated in this bill, very important. And that's the institution of the PSC and the regulatory compact. Now, onto the discussion about the issue that is a little part of this rate case, but maybe a bigger part of future rate cases around transmission. And I do think there are reasonable arguments and reasonable positions around the pros and the cons for allowing those in rates at any level by any state. And the burden of the proof is on us to show that those benefits do exist. Mr. Burbridge indicated earlier that while we have the agreement in place, the MSP agreement in place, that doesn't tie the commission's hands. We have to show that what we've done is prudent and those investments are prudent, and certainly respect, there's honest differences around, is there a benefit? How used and useful is it? Is it worth the price tag? But I would suggest that that's precisely what the PSC proceedings are for, is to get in that with people with much bigger brains than me to talk about how electrons move and why Wyoming benefits up to that share. And if we don't make it, then we get a disallowance. Shareholders eat that gap. So I just think that that's a good issue and a good one for the PSC and part of what we're doing today.
Well done. Thank you. Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I think you really highlighted the need for this bill and have put your finger on what's really going on out there. And I think the general principle we're starting to get at is the used and useful concept has been somewhat abused. And when you get a situation such as you're describing with this transmission line, I think it'll apply much more broadly than just to the one transmission line, where there is some utility to us, but it's relatively minor. We might not do it if it was just, we probably wouldn't do it just on our own. We wouldn't need it, but we do get some benefit from it. I think we may need to, and I'm not prepared to do it today, but I think this bill is an important vehicle. We may need to think of how to amend it, Mr. Chairman, so that in a circumstance such as you described, we could say, okay, it is doing us some good. It's doing us 1% instead of 15%, that kind of thing. That is a different way of approaching things. It would need a statutory basis, but it would give the basis to the commission then to be reasonable about something like this. And I think it would probably be litigated if we do something like that, but I think it would, by basing it on a reality that it is somewhat useful but not very, we'd be in a much better position to succeed in that litigation. So I think this, Mr. Chairman, is an important bill, and I'd be interested in any reaction that anybody has.
I think the reaction is from you, Mr. Garlish, because you're the guy that's sitting up here right now. Like, you should have ran while you had the chance.
No, I'm happy to be here and have these discussions, Mr. Chairman. I guess I just simply reiterate, like, I don't oppose the bill, and I don't oppose the statement of the importance of, to Wyoming, of a strong PUC that has guidance and direction about what's important to Wyoming. And I have a lot of respect and faith in the Public Service Commission and the people that run it and the work that they do. I mean, I can tell you that they hold us to a high standard, as they should. And they put us through our paces, as does the OCA. So I believe in the institution, and firming up the institution and giving it additional guidance is a benefit. So that's my reaction.
Thank you. Thank you. I might let you escape unless somebody has a question. You have a question for Mr. Garlish. Okay. And then at some point, I want to drill into whether the bill does allow that separate, partial. I think it might, but you go first, Senator.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the discussion so far. And right now, the bill seems to be focused on, we're disallowing costs to be imposed on our ratepayers only in the circumstance where those are required by other states. Say, I'm thinking of, a certain amount of alternative energies, being a part of the portfolio, certainly in the West Coast states. I'm wondering, would Rocky Mountain Power's position on the bill change if we're also to require, we're not going to pay for the cost due to increased demand in other states? Because I think that's what's driving a lot of this, as we discussed. We're building Gateway South, Gateway West because of the growth in places like Utah and Idaho, which, to my knowledge, I'm not sure if they have these, alternative, energy requirements And a lot of this is due to demand that does not exist in Wyoming. So I'm just wondering if that was something we were to add to the bill, if that would change Rocky Mountain Power's position.
Mr. Garlish.
Senator Case, Senator Boner, thanks for the question. It's a really good question. I have to pause for a second on that one. And just, I would say that I don't know that it would change the position very well, but that comes from the place of how I look at this bill and how I look at the regulatory process. You know, used and useful. We kind of glossed over that a little bit, but if you allow me to get a little wonky for just a second, that is a legal standard. It has hundreds of 100 years of interpretation of what used and useful is. It's been litigated a bunch of times. So, you know, we have to meet that legal burden to show that it is used and useful. And a part of that is showing that the demand and the benefits and all of those things are worth the investment in it. So the commission has, you know, the expertise, the authority, but also the obligation to make that determination. And I think that's where it is properly placed. Because there is a lot of, just in the little discussion that the chairman and I just had, there is a lot that goes into whether something is used and useful and if it's providing a benefit. And then the other thing that it's not my place to have an opinion on this, but I'll just make an observation as well, is that Wyoming has always been an energy exporting state and exported all of its resources. And so, you know, supporting rail to move coal and all those kinds of things. The resources that Wyoming has in the state, whether it's coal with CCUS, renewables, any of those things needs transmission to get out of the state and to be an export of energy to the state and to get the benefit of that. And that all is part of the discussion. So I just view that the bill doesn't need that because it's kind of wrapped into that legal standard and the technicalities of the PSC's review. That's my reaction.
Thank you. Representative Wiley.
Mr. Garlish, I have a question for you. We're kind of been talking about the multi-state protocol a little bit. Let's jump into the future. Say we hit these timeframes to where certain states have declared they will not purchase anything other than renewable energies. God forbid something happens and there's a disruption into that service of renewable energies. How would Rocky Mountain Power Pacific Corp adjust to that? Would they backfill that with other sourced power?
Mr. Garlish.
Thank you, Senator Case. Representative Wiley, that's a great question looking out in the future. You know, I do think it comes back to this notion fundamentally of where states want to pay their money and where they want to take their chances. So in a state like, I'll just pick on Oregon, where they, you know, have decided they wanted to be out of thermal generation and they believe, whatever you might think of it, they believe that they can fill that with renewable energy and batteries. So they're taking all the risk of that. And so if they get into a situation where they can't cover or serve their load, you know, they will be, you know, open to the market. And if there's excess energy in places like Utah or Wyoming and Idaho that they need, you know, I would expect, you know, through the MSP protocol or market dynamics, they would end up paying extra for that capacity or that energy to serve their load. Conversely, if you take a state like Utah or Wyoming, that if, for example, decided that they wanted to put their main money and take their chances into, you know, all thermal fleet and take the additional burdens of that and the benefits of it, the reliability, the dispatchability, and the additional costs for the capacity that others didn't want, you know, you might be in a position of strength in market or MSP protocol in the future. But you could be in a deficit for some reason. I don't know what that would be. Federal policy closes plants or whatever, and you don't have on the other side of that. You know, so it's a little bit of you know, a bet in where you want to go and what you feel comfortable with or the risk tolerance. But back to your question, if a state, whatever the state is, you know, they make a policy choice to only use a certain type of resource and that resource isn't sufficient to touch their load, they're going to have to pay somebody someplace for that energy and that capacity where it's available.
Representative Wiley.
So in short, yes, they will be backfed with other sources of
A nuanced
power.
yes, I
Yeah.
think.
Thank you.
Senator Case, oh, sorry.
So this stems back to the bill to where other states can make poor decisions, and then somebody's gonna have to carry the load. So I think that's where everybody's approaching this, and we're just trying to keep people honest in this agreement, in this protocol that we all work towards regularly, right? Every time we agree on new sections, new parts of the multi-state protocol. So I'm just touching back on that, and it shouldn't burden another state with tariffs if we're not making the poor decisions in our portfolio of energy consumption or production. Wouldn't you agree?
Mr. Garlish?
Thank you, Representative Wiley. Yeah, well, yes, sometimes I can't get that lawyer bone off of me, but yeah, yes. What I was trying to suggest though is that, there's the backfilling of it and of the demand, but there's also the economics and the price you pay for it. So, and the allocation of it.
You're good. I'm just agreeing
Yeah.
with you.
So, if you find yourself, you make a policy decision on thermal and you are the owner of that energy capacity, whether it's in the MSP protocol or in, the economics of the market, because there is a bilateral market for buying and selling energy in the Western Interconnection and the EIM, you might find yourself, state might find itself in a position where it has a product that it can, charge a premium for because there's a demand for it. So, as a utility, is an obligation to serve, how that would work for me. I'm going to try to get there. I'll do it faster. As an obligation, and just going to simplify this a little bit, but under our multi-state protocol, if we're in a position where you must serve, the load in the 6 states, but the policy of A is to do this and B is to do that, and we're going to have to comply with both of those. It gets down to me for our company. Well, where am I going to recover the costs of, the thermal fleet? Well, Oregon, Washington, they're not going to pay for the thermal fleet. So Utah, those costs, we'll be looking at Utah and Idaho and Wyoming to pay those costs and get those benefits of those types of generations portfolio. And then the opposite, Oregon would get all the costs, but what they perceive to be benefits of a portfolio that's made out of that. So that's how you would set up the base profile and the allocation of cost. But when you get in the real world and you start serving load and you need energy and you need capacity, energy gets bought and sold. And, so the market and the MSP protocol both play a part in covering the cost of serving the load.
Go ahead.
Thank you for the clarification. And I think it's important because folks don't understand. During our special meeting, I asked your CEO of Rocky Mountain Power if, other states would just pay a premium to, energy produced by coal or natural gas or something. And I think the answer was yes, they already have, because they've already retired their coal plants and stuff. And this would go above and beyond that, because the choices that they've made are going to box them into a corner. And then if you can't turn that tap on or flip that switch, you're still going to have to keep your people warm or cool. So thank you for the clarification.
And I'm going to protect you for a second. I think you're going to get a chance to respond, I promise. I think you're exactly right. But I think one thing that we all have to think about is we have to be protected from our choices too. And so let's decide we want, the governor is very big on coal and carbon sequestration. That may come back and bite us. I'm just telling you, it is not necessarily a protected choice forward, as we can't predict the future and whether there'll be customers for those plants. Because we have to be able to sell it. So a whole 100% thermal strategy, it's not clear to anybody that that's a prudent risk, especially with the fact that we're not big enough to support a thermal fleet. We have to find some way to run those plants and share the power with other people. And if we don't have like-minded customers, it could be really disastrous. So it cuts both ways. That's all I'm saying. Back to you, Representative, and you're going to get a chance to comment.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I absolutely agree. I was always told you never put all your eggs in one basket. So a balanced portfolio is key.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Garlish, I tried to help you, actually.
And I very much appreciate the help, Senator Gates. I would just say, yes, I mean, it's the states, I just want to say this, there are burdens and benefits, and having a balanced portfolio in the short, middle, and long term mitigates the risk of the burdens, and, makes sense. So I will take the protection and shut up.
There you go. Senator Scott, I see your hands up.
Yes,
Oh, I'm sorry.
Mr. Chairman,
We'll get Scott. Scott.
Mr. Chairman, we've been talking about 100% thermal, and just wanted to clarify with Mr. Garlich, because he was the first one that used that example. Am I right in thinking that as a practical matter, that's not feasible because we've already approved and got in long since a significant amount of renewable resources? And what we're really debating is not are we going to go 100% thermal, but what's the mix going to be? Am I understanding the world correctly?
Mr. Garland. Gosh.
The way I understood the question, which I think was Senator Case, Senator Scott, was, has Wyoming already gotten
A big green.
What's that? A big green. I was going
Yeah.
to say like balanced portfolio. Maybe the easiest way to say that is this. The state has included renewable energy resources in the recovery of rates that's been approved by the PSC, and it has provided benefits. In the current rate case, our ask would have been greater, but for renewables. There was the zero cost wind did allow, and the tax credits. I think we talked at length about this last time when Mr. Hogeveen was here. So there was benefits as part of being a little bit green.
And Representative Knapp, if you'll give me 1 second. This is another area of disagreement that fundamentally I have in the rate case with the company. Over and over, it's been said, and the press has picked it up, that renewable energy has saved the state money, okay? And that's an implication that's some kind of a net. The truth is, the short-run marginal cost of renewables is zero. They're wonderful when they're producing because they don't cost you a thing. But part of the cost of renewables is the challenge of filling in the gaps when they don't run. When they don't run, the short-run marginal cost that's relevant is whatever the resource you have to buy. And so truly, the whole, it's over and over, it's been said, Mr. Garlish, and that this case is about the net power costs, and those are fossil-based net power costs by and large. So it's fossil that's driving up the cost. Well, the press has got this wrong, a lot of them. The net power costs that we have to have are actually a cost of renewables. It's a cost of the new system we have gone to. They're hand in glove. And I can't get any traction with that, but maybe I can't with you either, Mr. Garlish, but that's a fundamental disagreement that we have on this too.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that is a fundamental disagreement, and I do disagree with you, and the company disagrees with you, and the PSC is going to tell us which one of us is right, and that's okay.
Yeah, fair enough.
We'll be fine with that.
Thank you. Representative Knapp.
Yes, piggybacking on that, Mr. Chairman, it is a cause and effect, I believe. One of the reasons for major rate increases is infrastructure on green energy and buying on the open market for energy. That was stated in testimony previously. My question, though, is as you're getting squeezed as a company on the multi-state protocol, because you have differences in culture and direction. And with any company, if you have two owners that disagree fundamentally on which way they're going, what do you see as the future of those protocols? Will they continue to divide and forced to be split, or how do you see that going?
Mr. Garlish.
Thank you, Senator Case, Representative Knapp. I think that's a great question, and I don't know that I have the crystal ball, or even if it would be wise to, make a bet on that today. But I think, your instincts and your insights are correct. We have 6 owners, and I think, you look at them, there used to be a lot more, there used to have a lot more common. There used to be a lot more overlap even between East and West. But, now I see, just my own observation, is that more states are concerned with the same things that I hear Wyoming concerned about. What is our own energy policy? What is our own future? And what are the instructions that we want to give to the utility. So I do think the multi-state protocol is a good, not that it's perfect, and I'm sure Senator Case and I can disagree about this too, but it does provide a mechanism to have, the negotiation about, first of all, where states want to, pay their money and take their chances, what's important to them sovereignty-wise, what they're willing to pay for. So we can get to the point, like fundamentally, right, I want to serve customers reliably and safely, but I want to recover my costs and I want to get my authorized rate of return. That's the fundamental deal. So a negotiated process like the MSP is a way to balance all those competing interests and get us to where we need to be on our business model. I like with that.
Thanks. I think we can let him off the hook, right? Thanks a lot. You've been very patient and good.
Thank you.
We have one comment online. Let's go for it. Mr. Moline. The Brett Moline?
Yes, I am, Mr. Chairman. Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation, sitting in support of this bill. Granted that most of my members are covered through rural cooperatives, so it won't impact them directly. But I'm estimating around 20% of my members will be impacted by this large increase. So I really appreciate that Wyoming customers would only have to pay for things that affect them. I do have a question on the bill on page 1, line 3. It says Wyoming ratepayers may be excluded from costs. As a question, should that be a shall? It's a shall on the second page, and then it's may on what costs, but that's just a question. But again, sitting in support of this bill, appreciate it. And Mr. Chairman, I hope it doesn't scare you, but I sure agree with your stand on the increase, that we are paying for things that we are not getting a benefit from. And with that, I would take any questions you or the committee may have for me.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moline. Josh, I might take a stab at this. You're referring to the bill title where it says may be excluded. It seems to be indeterminate, but yet in the bill itself, it says shall.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So, Josh, would it be fair to say that the constitutional standard that this is a hunting license to let people know what the bill may do is why it used the word may in that part of the title? Would that be fair?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think, because then the bill goes on to further say costs may be excluded. And so just because there is, even though it says they shall exclude certain costs, it gives the Public Service Commission some ability to determine what those will be. And so it seemed may would be appropriate for the title.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Moline. It's always good.
Thank you for this opportunity.
All right. Any questions for Mr. Moline? Thank you, sir. Thanks to your members.
Thank you.
Any other comment? Online, Senator Scott? Your hand's up. Do we got everybody? Okay. All right, committee. You've heard the discussion. What's your pleasure? And if we can get a motion on bill, I think Senator Boner had a couple of good ideas there about its expansion. So be ready on that if we get the motion. Who would like to offer a motion on the bill? We've got it by Harrelson and second by Ottman. And discussion on the bill, I will say that in the context of not restricting it just to the portfolio plans of other states, that might be a very, very good thing. I kind of came up with some language, but we could toss both out there and see. I don't really want that. I feel bad doing that as a chairman, but one thought would be to go to page 2 and go on line 7. Started on 6 with the full sentence. Costs that may be excluded include the, and I was going to insert the word proportional and strike the word capital and say, so it says costs that may be excluded include the proportional costs associated with facilities that are built or operated to provide benefits predominantly to other states, something like that. It leaves it kind of variable on both ends. So if that would handle the situation where it's really very, very diminutive, it doesn't rise to the 15% of the multi-state protocol. But on the other hand, it can be shown to have some benefit to Wyoming in percentage. Does that make sense to you guys?
One more time, because I got built or operated and there was.
Yes, so I'm still trying to fix the last part a little bit, but the sentence would read, costs that may be excluded include the proportional costs associated with facilities that are built or operated to predominantly for the benefit of other states. Let's use other states or entities outside Wyoming. Senator Scott, your hand's back up.
Yes.
Are you offering a second? I can't make the motion, so one of you got to make the motion. Motion by Boner. Is there a second?
Yes,
Okay, got it by you, Scott. Senator Scott. Continue, Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, as I listen to you, am I right in thinking what you're doing is replacing the word capital on line 7 by the word proportional? So
Correct.
not only are we allowing some proportionality here, which I think is important, but we're broadening it from just capital, so it could be other costs as well.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that's right.
And I guess I did the same thing with the built or operated, because I'm thinking, let's think about this. It's not just new facilities. Further discussion? Do you think you guys got it? Josh? Okay. Call for the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Got a no from you. I didn't mean to identify your name, but it's on the record. It's perfectly acceptable. I'm not calling you out, though. I still like you. Okay. Back on the bill. Any other changes? Any other changes? Why don't we call the roll on the bill? Oh, we have a comment from Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, and I certainly appreciate the intent of this bill, and I will be supporting it. Seems like the first sentence of the bill, lines 1 through 6, actually address, I think, everything, including the proportionality issue. And then the rest, we start limiting what the commission can do. Because then as you go down below, even with the new language that the good chairman added, you start saying, oh, there's fewer things, and then you get down to the third sentence, if I counted my sentences correctly, and you start talking about used to say, we're built at a higher cost, and that's even more limiting and alternative sources. So, I mean, I'm going to support the bill, but I think the first sentence, maybe with a minor adjustment, the shall is in that sentence, and the third sentence, it's a may, to proportional. So anyway, I think there's 3 times as many words on this page to get the same policy across. That is actually I think a important policy to put across for the public and for the Public Service Commission. But I think there's 3 times as many words as we actually need to say what I think we want to say. And I think the additional words actually are limiting for the commission to actually take a look at, limit the commission. So I'll support it, but I think when we get toward the session, if it should start in the Senate, we'll have a conversation about how we actually ensure that it's as broad and as possible. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And I appreciate the words from my mission-focused Marine friend. It makes a lot of sense. But I think it's important that we introduce this concept of the proportionality because the legal standard, I'm not sure that nuance, I think that's embodied in the first sentence, but I think we're trying to send a message here And so I appreciate that you're willing to let it go forward and we can discuss it more. Thank you for that. Anybody else? Any other comments? Call for the roll.
Mr. Chairman, roll call for 24 LSO 0232, electricity rates for costs that do not benefit Wyoming as amended. Senator Barlow.
Aye.
Senator Boner.
Aye.
Senator Landon, excused. Senator Scott.
Aye.
Representative Chadwick.
Aye.
Representative Haroldson.
Aye.
Representative Harshman.
Aye.
Representative Knapp.
Aye.
Representative Newsom. Representative Ottman.
Aye.
Representative Wiley. Representative Yin.
No.
Chairman Case.
Aye.
Co-Chairman Olson, excused. 11 aye, 1 no, 2 excused.
Okay, the bill is passed and we'll see where it goes. I appreciate it. It's time for us to think about lunch. We've done 3 out of the 7 bills that we have on our agenda today. I would propose that we come back at 1:30, and our hope is to get everybody on the road at a reasonable time. So how about if we adjourn till 1:30? Recess till 1:30. Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just as a note for the chairman and for the committee, we do have some folks here from the Rural Electric Association, including their executive director, and they were wishing to give an update on kind of the discussions about the territorial issues. And so if you would consider when you might put them up, so maybe they don't have to stay as late in the day. I don't know if they want to be a part of the third-party generation, but certainly that's part of it. But I just put that out there because there's continuing discussions. That bill is not on the agenda.
Okay.
There is not a bill to be considered, but I think there is information they'd like at least the committee to be aware of as it may come to this session as a individual bill. So anyway, just some considerations for those folks in case they have plans. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Appreciate it. We certainly extend courtesies if we can. We know that Mr. Taylor will be here till the bitter end, but Mr. Taylor, would you like to do that right after lunch? And can it be pretty short? Or what is your pleasure? Okay. We'll just get it at the end is what we'll do. All right. We'll tell 1:30.